Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. FBI Special Agent Cornelius Blackthorne stood at the edge of Mulholland Drive, looking down at the glittering lights of Los Angeles below. The calendar read a foggy October morning in the year 1999. It was exactly 2 o'clock. Deep in the Hollywood Hills, a crime scene awaited him that would shake everything he thought he knew about the dark side of the entertainment industry. The call had come from Detective Margaret Whitfield of the Los Angeles Police Department. She was a seasoned officer who had seen a lot and wasn't easily shaken, but her voice on the phone was different this time. Tense, uncertain, and unusually anxious. "Cornelius, we need federal support on this case," she said. "We found something at a mansion in Laurel Canyon. The owner, Mitchell Goldberg, a film producer. But what we found in the basement doesn't look like a typical crime scene at all. Mitchell Goldberg was one of Hollywood's most famous names. He was the producer of 17 box office hits, had won 3 Academy Awards, and, according to the tabloids, was currently on vacation in the Maldives. But clearly, the truth was very different. The mansion was a modern monument to opulence. Huge glass walls, infinity pools, and a view stretching from the city center to the Pacific. The property was cordoned off with police tape, and uniformed officers were keeping paparazzi at bay. Detective Whitfield was waiting for Blackthorne at the entrance. "There are things you need to know before you go in," he said in a stern but anxious voice. "Murder, suicide, overdose, we've seen it all. But this isn't one of those cases. This is something organized." She led him through the pristine interior, past original Warhols and Basquiat's, down a hidden staircase behind what appeared to be a wine cellar. The basement was completely different from the house above. Older construction, possibly from the 1920s when the hills were first developed. In the center of the room was an embalming table. On it lay Mitchell Goldberg, or what was left of him. His body had been partially preserved, partially harvested. Organs removed with surgical precision, blood drained and replaced with embalming fluid. But the process was incomplete, as if interrupted. "The neighbors called in a smell complaint," Whitfield explained. "Goldberg's been dead for at least 2 weeks. But according to his social media, he's been posting vacation photos from the Maldives the entire time." Blackthorne examined the scene more carefully. The equipment was professional grade, the kind used in high-end mortuary services. But there were additions: video cameras positioned around the table, recording equipment, and most disturbing, what appeared to be a buyer's catalog on a nearby desk. The catalog was filled with photographs of bodies in various states of preservation, each with a price tag. Some were marked "sold," with delivery addresses that Blackthorne recognized as exclusive neighborhoods in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, and Malibu. "They're selling corpses?" Whitfield asked, reading over his shoulder. "Not just corpses," Blackthorne corrected, noticing the detailed descriptions. "Preserved bodies of specific individuals. Look at this, Academy Award winner, preserved at peak of career, full arterial embalming with custom formulation. This is a catalog for collectors." The revelation was sickening, but it was the client list that truly shocked them. Code names, but with enough detail to suggest these weren't just wealthy eccentrics. These were people who wanted to own the bodies of celebrities, to possess them literally after failing to possess their attention in life. Among Goldberg's papers, they found correspondence with someone identified only as the curator. The messages discussed acquisitions, preservation techniques, and most chillingly, live procurement. "Dear Mr. Goldberg," one letter read, "your latest acquisition has been well received. The client is particularly pleased with the preservation quality. As discussed, we have 3 more orders pending, including the special request for the young actress. Please confirm timeline for fulfillment." The young actress. Blackthorn's mind raced through recent Hollywood disappearances. There had been several, always explained away: rehab, nervous breakdowns, sudden retreats from public life. But what if they weren't explanations, but cover stories? Whitfield's team found a hidden room behind the embalming area. Inside were 3 industrial freezers. 2 were empty, showing signs of recent use. The third contained a body Blackthorn recognized immediately: Jessica Chen, a rising starlet who'd supposedly died in a car accident in Malibu 3 months ago. Her funeral had been closed casket, her body supposedly too damaged to view. But here she was, perfectly preserved, wearing the same dress she'd worn to her last premiere. A tag on her wrist read, "Reserved, client number 47, delivery pending. We need to check every celebrity death in the last 5 years," Blackthorn said. Every closed casket funeral, every cremation where the family didn't view the body. The investigation expanded rapidly. Goldberg's financial records revealed payments from numbered Swiss accounts totaling millions of dollars. His phone records showed regular contact with several other high-profile Hollywood figures, including director Theodore Ashford and talent agent Paula Morrison. Theodore Ashford was Hollywood royalty. His films had defined a generation, his artistic vision celebrated worldwide. When Blackthorn and Whitfield arrived at his Holmby Hills estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by film memorabilia and Academy Awards. "Mr. Ashford," Blackthorn began, "we need to ask you about your relationship with Mitchell Goldberg." Ashford's composed facade cracked slightly. "Mitchell was a colleague. We worked on several films together. We found your number in his phone records. 17 calls in the week before his death. We were discussing a new project." A film project? Or something involving the Hollywood Hills Burial Society? The name was a guess, pulled from a cryptic reference in Goldberg's notes, but Ashford's reaction confirmed its significance. His face went pale, his hands trembling as he reached for a glass of whiskey. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "It started as something else. A group of collectors, people who loved cinema so much they wanted to preserve its history, props, costumes, memorabilia. But then someone suggested, why not preserve the stars themselves? You're telling me there's a group that collects dead celebrities. Not just collects. Commissions. They decide who they want and they acquire them. Sometimes they wait for natural deaths. Sometimes they don't wait." The implications were staggering. Blackthorn immediately called for backup and warrants for every person on Goldberg's contact list. But as he was coordinating with the FBI field office, Whitfield received an urgent call. "There's been another discovery," she said. "A groundskeeper at Hollywood Forever Cemetery reported disturbed graves. Multiple mausoleums have been opened. Hollywood Forever Cemetery was where many of Hollywood's Golden Age stars were interred." When they arrived, the groundskeeper, an elderly man named Joseph, led them to a section containing some of the most famous graves in Hollywood history. "I do my rounds every night," Joseph explained. "Last night everything was normal. This morning, 5 mausoleums were open, the bodies gone. The missing bodies were all legendary figures, actors and actresses from the 1940s and 50s, names that still commanded reverence decades after their deaths. But why take bodies that had been dead for so long? In one of the disturbed mausoleums, Blackthorne found a business card tucked into a crevice. Eternal Productions, Preservation of Cinematic History. The address was in downtown Los Angeles, in an industrial area known for warehouses and manufacturing. The warehouse at the listed address appeared abandoned from the outside, but thermal imaging showed heat signatures inside. Multiple people and something else. Large heat sources consistent with industrial equipment. The raid was coordinated for dawn. FBISWAT, LAPD, and even ATF, given the unknown nature of what they might find. Blackthorne led the entry team, breaching the main door to find themselves in what looked like a film set, a perfect recreation of a 1940s Hollywood studio. But it wasn't a set, it was a showroom. Bodies were displayed throughout the space, posed in scenes from their most famous films. Each was perfectly preserved, wearing authentic costumes, positioned with props from their actual movies. It was Macabre Museum, a temple to obsession disguised as preservation. In the center of the space, a man in an expensive suit was calmly sipping coffee, as if he'd been waiting for them. He introduced himself as Marcus Wellington, CEO of Eternal Productions. "Gentlemen, lady," he said, nodding to Whitfield. "I assume you have a warrant?" "We do. And you're under arrest for grave robbery at minimum." Wellington laughed. "Grave robbery? We're preservationists. These bodies were rotting away, forgotten in their tombs. We've given them eternal life, eternal relevance. Their families sold us the rights. Sold you the rights to desecrate graves? Sold us the rights to preserve their loved ones for posterity. Every body here was legally acquired. We have contracts signed by next of kin, exchanging remains for substantial compensation." Blackthorne examined the contracts Wellington proudly produced. They were real, legally binding documents, signed by family members who'd traded their ancestors' bodies for money. But the contracts were vague about what preservation and display meant. And the recent deaths? Jessica Chen? Mitchell Goldberg himself? Wellington's smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about. We only work with families of the already deceased, but a search of the facility revealed otherwise. In a refrigerated section, they found bodies of recently deceased celebrities, including some whose deaths hadn't even been announced yet. One room contained medical equipment and surgical tools, suggesting bodies were being modified or preserved on site. The most disturbing discovery was in Wellington's office, a list titled Future Acquisitions, containing names of living actors, musicians, and directors. Next to each name were notes: terminal illness, 6 months, substance abuse issues, likely overdose, depression, suicide risk. They were tracking vulnerable celebrities, waiting for them to die, or perhaps ensuring they would. Among the papers was correspondence with international clients. Wealthy collectors from Japan, Russia, and the Middle East were bidding on specific celebrities, some requesting fresh preservation, while others wanted aged authenticity. One letter particularly stood out. "The client in Dubai has increased his offer for the complete set of 1950s Best Actress winners. He's particularly interested in acquiring MM, still living, upon her natural passing. Please monitor her health status closely." MM, Blackthorne knew exactly who that meant. Martha Montgomery, the 94-year-old actress living in a Beverly Hills nursing home. They were waiting for her to die to complete someone's collection. "This is insane," Whitfield said, reading the documents. "They're treating human bodies like baseball cards." "It's worse than that," Blackthorne corrected. "Look at these medical records. They've been accessing private health information, tracking terminal diagnoses, predicting deaths. They know who's going to die before the families do. Wellington maintained his composure even as he was handcuffed. You think you've stopped something, but you've only found one outlet. The desire to own, to possess, to preserve, it's human nature. There will always be those who want to capture beauty, talent, fame, even in death. As Wellington was led away, Blackthorne noticed something in the warehouse's layout. The displays were organized chronologically, from silent film stars to modern celebrities. But there was a gap, a space being prepared for something. In that space, construction materials and a plaque that read, "The New Millennium Collection, coming soon." They weren't just preserving the past. They were planning for the future, expecting more deaths, more acquisitions. The Hollywood Hills Burial Society wasn't just a crime ring. It was an industry. The investigation had only scratched the surface. Every lead pointed to more connections, more clients, more bodies. Hollywood's relationship with death had always been complicated, but this was something else entirely. This was death as commodity, fame as currency even beyond the grave. The arrest of Marcus Wellington sent shockwaves through Hollywood's elite circles. Within hours of the warehouse raid, Blackthorne's phone was ringing non-stop. Studio executives, agents, and lawyers all demanding to know if their clients were on the future acquisitions list. The morbid reality of people checking if they were marked for death created a surreal atmosphere at the FBI field office. Detective Margaret Whitfield had been assigned to interview the families who'd sold their relatives' remains to Eternal Productions. The first was Jennifer Hartley, daughter of 1940s starlet Virginia Hartley. "They approached me 5 years ago," Jennifer explained, tears streaming down her face. "My mother had been dead for 20 years. They said they wanted to create a museum exhibit to honor her legacy. The money, I was about to lose my house. Mom would have wanted me to keep the family home." "How much did they pay you?" $200,000. They said her body would be treated with respect, displayed in a private collection for film historians. I never imagined this. The pattern was consistent. Eternal Productions had targeted families in financial distress, offering substantial sums for remains of deceased celebrities. The contracts were carefully worded to avoid explicitly stating what would happen to the bodies, using terms like preservation, curation, and private exhibition. Meanwhile, Blackthorne focused on the living celebrities on the future acquisitions list. Martha Montgomery, the 94-year-old actress, was his first priority. He found her at the Golden Years nursing home in Beverly Hills, frail but sharp-minded. "Ms. Montgomery, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Have you noticed anyone unusual around the facility? Anyone asking about your health?" Martha's eyes narrowed with a clarity that belied her age. "There's been a young man, claims to be writing my biography. He visits weekly, asks about my medical conditions, my medications. I thought it was thorough research, but now..." The biographer was identified as Kevin Walsh, who, upon investigation, didn't exist. The man visiting Martha was actually Thomas Brennan, an employee of Eternal Productions specializing in pre-acquisition assessment. When arrested, they found detailed notes on Martha's health, including copies of her medical charts obtained through bribes to nursing home staff. But the investigation took a darker turn when Theodore Ashford, the director they'd interviewed earlier, was found dead in his Holmby Hills mansion. The scene was staged to look like suicide. Pills, a note, even a glass of his favorite whiskey. But Blackthorne noticed inconsistencies. "The note's in his handwriting," Whitfield observed. "But look at the date. It's dated 3 days ago, but the neighbors saw him yesterday." Forensic analysis confirmed their suspicions. Ashford had been murdered. forced to write the suicide note days before his actual death. Someone was cleaning house, eliminating witnesses who could expose the full extent of the Hollywood Hills Burial Society. The note itself was revealing in its forced confession, "I cannot live with what I've done." The society promised immortality for cinema's greatest stars, but we became merchants of death. I'm sorry for my part in this desecration. May God forgive us all. Among Ashford's personal effects, they found a hidden safe containing documentation that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The Hollywood Hills Burial Society wasn't just buying and selling celebrity corpses. They were actively hastening deaths. One document outlined acceleration protocols, methods for ensuring targeted celebrities would die sooner, switching medications, introducing toxins that mimicked natural causes, even orchestrating accidents. Each death was carefully planned to appear natural or self-inflicted. The list of victims was staggering. Robert Stone, the action star who died in a stunt gone wrong 6 months ago. Maria Rodriguez, the singer who'd overdosed despite being clean for 3 years. James Patterson, the comedian whose heart attack, at 42, had shocked everyone. Each death had been orchestrated, their bodies immediately claimed by Eternal Productions through forged documentation or bribed officials. The bodies were then sold to collectors for millions, sometimes before the public even knew they were dead. Blackthorne called an emergency meeting with the district attorney and the chief of police. The conspiracy reached into the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, where Dr. Michael Harrison had been falsifying autopsy reports for years. When they arrested Dr. Harrison, he broke down completely. They had leverage on everyone, he sobbed. Photos, videos, evidence of affairs, drug use, anything that could destroy a career. If you didn't cooperate, they'd destroy you. If you tried to expose them, you'd end up on the acquisition list yourself. The blackmail network was extensive. The society had been gathering dirt on Hollywood's elite for decades, using it to ensure cooperation or silence. Those who couldn't be blackmailed were bought, and those who couldn't be bought were targeted for acquisition. A raid on Dr. Harrison's home revealed the medical side of the operation. He'd been developing new embalming techniques that preserved bodies in lifelike condition for decades. His laboratory contained experimental chemicals, some derived from rare plants and minerals, that could halt decomposition almost indefinitely. The collectors want permanence, Harrison explained during interrogation. They pay millions for a celebrity's body. They want it to last forever. I developed a process that essentially turns organic tissue into a polymer-like substance while maintaining appearance and texture. You turned human beings into dolls. I preserved them for eternity. In 1,000 years, archaeologists will find these bodies in perfect condition. We've created immortality. The twisted logic was consistent throughout the organization. They saw themselves as preservationists, saviors of Hollywood history, even as they murdered the very people they claimed to honor. The investigation expanded to include financial forensics. The money trail led to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. But the real shock came when they traced the ultimate ownership of these accounts. 7 of Hollywood's major studios had shadow investments in Eternal Productions. The studios hadn't directly participated in the murders, but they'd profited from the deaths. Insurance policies on stars who died young, rights to unreleased footage that became more valuable after death, even merchandising opportunities that spiked with posthumous fame. The studios had financial incentive for certain celebrities to die at peak popularity. Blackthorne confronted Stephen Marcus, CEO of Paramount Pictures, with the evidence. "We had no knowledge of any criminal activity," Marcus insisted. his team of lawyers flanking him. Our investment in Eternal Productions was for legitimate preservation of film history. You invested $3 million in a company that sells corpses. We invested in a company that promised to maintain Hollywood heritage. Any criminal actions were undertaken without our knowledge or consent. The legal ramifications were staggering. Every major studio lawyered up, denying knowledge while quietly settling with victims' families out of court. The entertainment industry was in crisis, with productions halting as actors refused to work, terrified they might be next on an acquisition list. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Paula Morrison, the talent agent on Goldberg's contact list, approached Blackthorne secretly. "I want immunity," she said. "Full immunity, witness protection, everything. In exchange, I'll give you the curator." The curator, the mysterious figure who'd orchestrated everything from the shadows. "I've only met him once," Morrison explained. "But I know who he is. He's someone everyone in Hollywood knows, but no one suspects. He's been collecting for 40 years, building his private museum." "Who is he?" "Walter Blackstone, the philanthropist." Walter Blackstone was Hollywood royalty of a different sort. Never in front of the cameras, but behind every major production for 4 decades. His charitable foundation had donated hundreds of millions to film preservation, museums, and educational programs. He was considered a saint of cinema. His estate in the Santa Monica Mountains was more fortress than home. When the FBI arrived with warrants, they found it empty. But the basement revealed the truth. A private museum containing over 100 preserved bodies, each displayed in elaborate dioramas recreating their most famous scenes. It was a temple to obsession, a monument to a man who loved cinema so much he needed to possess its stars literally. Every major name from Hollywood's golden age was there, stolen from graves or acquired through the society. Among the displays they found something even more disturbing, a section labeled Living Collection, containing detailed medical monitors showing real-time vital signs of 12 individuals. These weren't historical figures, but current stars being monitored, their health tracked, their deaths anticipated. One monitor showed a flat line, dated just hours ago. The name, Alexandra Pierce, a rising actress who'd just won her first major award. According to news reports, she was vacationing in Hawaii. According to the monitor, she was dead. He's still operating, Blackthorne realized. Even with his network exposed, he's still killing. They tracked Alexandra's supposed location in Hawaii, but found only a body double-hired to maintain her social media presence. The real Alexandra had been taken 3 days ago, her death staged to allow time for preservation. The hunt for Walter Blackstone became international. Interpol was involved, every airport and border watched. But Blackstone had resources and connections worldwide. Reports came in of him being spotted in Switzerland, Japan, Dubai, each sighting proving false. Then, 2 weeks into the manhunt, Blackthorne received a package at his home. Inside was a DVD and a note. "Agent Blackthorne, you've destroyed something beautiful." The society was never about death. It was about defeating death. Every star we preserved would have rotted in the ground, forgotten. We gave them eternal life, eternal relevance. You call us murderers, but we are artists. We sculpted legacy from flesh, created permanence from decay. The bodies you rescued will rot now. Their families will forget them. Their films will be archived and ignored. But my collection endures. You found one museum, but I have 7. You stopped one society, but there are others in every major city. We are not criminals. We are the future of how humanity deals with death. The actress you seek is beyond your reach, preserved at the moment of her greatest beauty. She will never age, never decay, never be forgotten. Is that not a gift? Cinema is about capturing moments forever. We simply extended that to its logical conclusion. The Curator. The DVD contained footage of Alexandra Pierce's final moments. She'd been conscious, aware of what was happening, pleading for her life even as the embalming process began. It was torture disguised as preservation, murder masquerading as art. But the video also contained a crucial mistake. A reflection in a medical instrument showing a distinctive architectural feature. Blackthorne recognized it immediately. The old Griffith Observatory, abandoned since the 1994 earthquake. The raid on Griffith Observatory was conducted at night, SWAT teams approaching from multiple angles. They found Blackstone in the planetarium, surrounded by his latest acquisitions. Alexandra Pierce was there, along with 5 other recently deceased celebrities, all in various stages of his preservation process. Blackstone didn't resist arrest. At 78 years old, wearing a velvet smoking jacket, he seemed almost relieved to be caught. "You think you've won," he said to Blackthorne. "But you've only delayed the inevitable. Death is humanity's greatest failure, and we were solving it. Not through medicine or technology, but through art. Every body we preserved was a victory against entropy. You murdered innocent people. I transformed mortals into immortals. In 100 years, no one will remember their names unless they're preserved. Film degrades, digital files corrupt, but my preservation technique will last millennia. I've created the only true immortality." As Blackstone was led away, Blackthorne surveyed the observatory. It had been converted into a massive preservation facility, with equipment for embalming, freezing, and displaying bodies. But there was also something else. Research into consciousness transfer, attempts to preserve not just bodies but minds. He was trying to preserve himself, Whitfield observed, looking at the medical equipment, transfer his consciousness into a younger body. "The ultimate collection," Blackthorne replied. "Collecting bodies to eventually inhabit." The trials that followed were the most publicized in Los Angeles history. Blackstone was charged with 37 counts of murder, though investigators suspected the real number was much higher. His network of accomplices faced various charges from conspiracy to murder to grave desecration. The trial of Walter Blackstone was set to begin in 3 months, but the investigation was far from over. Agent Cornelius Blackthorne found himself drowning in evidence that suggested the Hollywood Hills Burial Society was just the Los Angeles branch of something much larger. Detective Margaret Whitfield had been following up on the international connections when she made a disturbing discovery. 3 celebrities who died in Europe over the past year had been embalmed using the exact techniques Dr. Harrison had developed. The bodies had disappeared from morgues before burial, only to resurface in private collections in Russia and Japan. "This is global," she told Blackthorne during a meeting at the FBI field office. "And it's not just Hollywood celebrities. Musicians in London, models in Milan, athletes in Rio. Anyone famous enough to have collector value." The evidence room had become a macabre archive. Hundreds of photographs documenting preserved bodies, financial records showing millions in transactions, and, most disturbing, video testimonies from former society members who'd come forward after Blackstone's arrest. One testimony stood out. Richard Carmichael, a special effects artist who'd worked on several blockbuster films, admitted to creating lifelike replicas of celebrities for the society. They didn't always use real bodies, he confessed during his recorded interview. Sometimes, when a celebrity was too high profile or their death too scrutinized, they'd commission replicas. "I created perfect silicone copies. indistinguishable from the real thing unless you performed an autopsy. So, some of the bodies in collections are fake, about 30%. The collectors never knew. They paid millions for what they thought were preserved celebrities, but they were just elaborate mannequins. The real bodies were cremated normally, families none the wiser. This revelation added another layer to the conspiracy. Not only were they murdering and stealing bodies, but they were also defrauding their clients. It was a double deception that had netted the society hundreds of millions of dollars. Blackthorne decided to interview Walter Blackstone personally. In the federal detention center, Blackstone appeared to have aged years in weeks. His customary confidence had faded, replaced by a hollow acceptance of his fate. "You want to understand why," Blackstone said before Blackthorne could speak. "Why someone with everything would do this. I want to know how many more are out there. How many more bodies, how many more victims." Blackstone laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think this is about numbers? This is about legacy, Agent Blackthorne. In 100 years, who will remember these celebrities? Their films will be archived and forgotten, their music relegated to oldies stations. But my collection would have endured forever. You killed innocent people. I preserved them at their peak. Do you know what happens to celebrities when they age? They become parodies of themselves, desperate for relevance, clinging to past glory. I saved them from that indignity. You murdered them for your sick obsession." "I loved them," Blackstone said, and for the first time emotion crept into his voice. "Every single one. I watched their films hundreds of times, memorized their dialogues, studied their movements. They were gods to me, and gods shouldn't decay." The psychological profile of Blackstone revealed severe personality disorders rooted in childhood trauma. His mother had been a failed actress who'd committed suicide when he was 12, found in her apartment weeks after death, decomposed beyond recognition. Young Walter had been the one to find her. "She was beautiful in life," Blackstone continued, "but in death she became something horrible. I swore then that beauty should be preserved, that death shouldn't be allowed to win." While Blackstone's motivations were being analyzed, Whitfield uncovered something that changed the entire investigation. Hidden in the financial records was evidence of a silent partner, someone who'd been funding the society from the beginning, but whose identity had been carefully concealed. The trail led to Elizabeth Morrison, widow of studio mogul Harold Morrison, and one of Hollywood's most respected philanthropists. Her charity, the Morrison Foundation, had donated millions to film preservation, money that had been secretly funneled to the society. When they arrived at her Bel Air mansion to question her, they found Elizabeth in her private screening room, watching old films from Hollywood's golden age. She didn't seem surprised to see them. "I've been expecting you," she said, pausing the film. "Walter always said you were clever, Agent Blackthorne. You funded the murder of innocent people. I funded the preservation of art. What Walter did with that funding was his business. You knew exactly what he was doing." Elizabeth stood, moving to a wall of photographs. All deceased celebrities, all smiling, all frozen in their prime. "My husband collected their contracts," she said, "owned their films, their images, their legacies. But he could never own them. It ate at him, the fact that these beautiful creatures were beyond his reach. When he died, I inherited his obsession. So you created the society? I created the opportunity. Walter created the society. I simply provided the means for him to realize his vision. And what a vision it was, a world where beauty never fades, where stars shine forever." Elizabeth's arrest sent shockwaves through Hollywood's philanthropic community. She'd been considered untouchable, her charity work legendary. But beneath the veneer of respectability was a woman who'd facilitated dozens of murders. The investigation revealed that Elizabeth had been more than just a financial backer. She'd been selecting targets, using her charity events to assess celebrities' health, their vulnerabilities, their value to potential collectors. Her famous annual gala, attended by Hollywood's elite, had been a shopping catalog for the society. Meanwhile, families of victims began coming forward with disturbing stories. Several reported that their loved ones had mentioned feeling watched, followed, studied in the weeks before their deaths. Others revealed that they'd been approached after the deaths with offers to preserve their loved one's legacy through private collectors. The family of Robert Stone, the action star who died in the staged stunt accident, provided crucial evidence. Robert's sister Patricia had kept voicemails from her brother in the days before his death. "Pat, something's wrong," Robert's recorded voice said. "There are people at the studio who aren't supposed to be there. They're measuring me, taking photos when they think I'm not looking. The stunt coordinator is new, someone I've never worked with. I think—" The message cut off. Robert died the next day when a carefully rigged stunt went wrong. The stunt coordinator disappeared immediately after, never to be found. As more evidence emerged, a pattern became clear. The society had operatives embedded throughout Hollywood: makeup artists who collected DNA samples, personal trainers who monitored health conditions, assistants who reported on private schedules. It was a surveillance network that would make intelligence agencies envious. One operative who agreed to cooperate was Jennifer Walsh, who'd worked as a personal assistant to several A-list celebrities over the past decade. Her testimony was chilling. "I was recruited 5 years ago," she explained. "They said I'd be helping to preserve Hollywood history. My job was to report on my employer's health, their routines, their security measures. I provided detailed reports on 12 celebrities. 7 of them are now dead. Did you know they were going to be killed? I suspected after the 3rd death. They all died within months of my reports indicating they were at their peak preservation point. Young enough to be beautiful, famous enough to be valuable, but showing signs of decline that would affect their market value." The concept of peak preservation point was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the society's methodology. They had developed an algorithm that calculated the optimal time to acquire a celebrity, balancing their fame, physical condition, and likelihood of natural death. The algorithm had been created by Dr. Gregory Hamilton, a data scientist who thought he was developing a predictive model for insurance companies. When he learned the truth, he'd tried to destroy his work, but the society had already implemented it. It could predict with 87% accuracy when a celebrity would be at their most valuable as a preserved specimen, Hamilton explained to investigators. "I thought I was helping insurance companies assess risk. I was actually creating a murder schedule." The algorithm's code, recovered from encrypted servers, showed calculations that reduced human beings to numerical values. Fame was worth points, youth was worth points, tragic circumstances of death added value. The system had ranked every celebrity in Hollywood, creating a prioritized kill list. Alexandra Pierce had been at the top of that list. During the investigation of her murder, forensics discovered something that had been missed initially. Alexandra had fought back. Under her fingernails was DNA evidence, and defensive wounds suggested she'd injured her attacker significantly. The DNA matched someone in the system, Marcus Webb, a paramedic who'd been first on scene at several celebrity deaths over the past 3 years. When arrested, Webb's left arm showed healing scratches consistent with Alexandra's defensive wounds. Webb's confession revealed the medical side of the acquisition process. Paramedics and EMTs on the society's payroll would ensure that targeted celebrities were pronounced dead even if they could be saved. Or in some cases, they'd administer drugs that would complete what an injury or overdose had started. We were told we were mercy killers, Webb said, that these people were going to die anyway, and we were just ensuring they'd be preserved at their best. The drugs we used were untraceable, breaking down in the body within hours. The list of corrupted medical professionals grew daily. Nurses who'd switched medications, doctors who'd falsified medical records, psychiatrists who'd pushed vulnerable celebrities toward suicide. The medical establishment in Los Angeles was riddled with society operatives. Dr. Sarah Goldman, chief psychiatrist at a prominent Beverly Hills clinic where many celebrities sought treatment, was arrested when her records revealed she'd been profiling patients for the society. Her notes on one patient were particularly damning. Subject shows signs of severe depression, suicidal ideation increasing. Prescription adjusted to accelerate deterioration. Estimated acquisition window 3 to 4 weeks. Preservation value high. Recent Oscar winner, peak physical condition. Tragic narrative increases value. The patient in question had died by suicide 2 weeks after that note was written. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, panic gripped Hollywood. Celebrities hired bodyguards, changed doctors. Some fled the country entirely. The entertainment industry ground to a halt as paranoia replaced productivity. But the investigation was about to take another turn. Among Blackstone's possessions, investigators found a journal dating back 40 years. The entries revealed that the Hollywood Hills Burial Society was itself just the latest incarnation of something much older. The journal referenced the Collection, an organization that had existed since the 1920s, originally founded by silent film producers who wanted to preserve the beauty of stars who died young. Rudolph Valentino, Jean Harlow, James Dean, all had supposedly been secretly preserved by the Collection before their public burials. The Collection has existed in various forms for a century, Blackstone had written. I am merely its current curator. When I am gone, another will take my place. The work is eternal. This revelation sent investigators searching through Hollywood history. Strange disappearances, suspicious deaths, graves found empty during relocations, all potentially the work of the Collection over decades. A storage facility in Riverside County, paid for through a trust established in 1926, contained the proof. Inside were preservation chambers dating back decades, some still containing bodies. The technology was primitive by modern standards, but the intent was the same, to capture and keep Hollywood's brightest stars. Among the preserved bodies was one that shocked even hardened investigators. A famous child actress from the 1930s who'd supposedly died of natural causes. Medical examination revealed she'd been poisoned with mercury, a common preservation chemical at the time that would have killed her slowly while maintaining her appearance. The Collection hadn't just been preserving the dead, they'd been creating them for almost a century. Blackthorne stood in that storage facility, surrounded by decades of Hollywood's dark secret, and realized the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just a crime ring or a conspiracy. It was a tradition, passed down through generations of Hollywood's elite, a deadly devotion to preserving beauty at any cost. The discovery of the Collection's century-long history transformed the investigation from a contemporary crime case into an archaeological excavation of Hollywood's darkest secrets. Agent Cornelius Blackthorne found himself leading a task force that included historians, film archivists, and forensic anthropologists. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a historian specializing in early Hollywood, was brought in to analyze the Collection's historical documents found in the Riverside facility. What she discovered rewrote the accepted history of numerous celebrity deaths. The 1920s were the Wild West of Hollywood, she explained to the task force. No real oversight, no regulations. The studio system controlled everything, including life and death. If a star became inconvenient, they disappeared. We always assumed they were paid off or threatened into silence. We never imagined they were being preserved. The documents revealed a structured organization with rules, hierarchies, and even a code of conduct. The collection had operated like a secret society, with members sworn to secrecy under penalty of becoming part of the collection themselves. One document, dated 1947, outlined the organization's philosophy. We are the guardians of eternal beauty. As museums preserve paintings and sculptures, we preserve the human form at its most magnificent. Future generations will thank us for our foresight, for saving these temples of beauty from the ravages of time. Detective Margaret Whitfield had been investigating the modern financial networks when she uncovered something that brought the investigation full circle. A payment of $10 million had been made to Walter Blackstone's account 3 days before his arrest. Not for a past acquisition, but for a future one. The target was Jennifer Lawrence, a veteran actress now in her 70s who'd been Hollywood royalty for 5 decades. According to intercepted communications, she was to be acquired during an upcoming Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony. "They're still active," Whitfield told Blackthorne. Even with Blackstone in custody, even with the society exposed, someone is still planning acquisitions. Jennifer Lawrence was immediately placed under federal protection, but she insisted on being part of the investigation. "I've known something was wrong in Hollywood for years," she said during her interview. "Friends dying mysteriously, others disappearing completely. We all suspected something, but we were too afraid to speak up. The studio system might be gone, but its control mechanisms remained." She revealed that she'd been keeping her own records for decades, documenting suspicious deaths and disappearances. Her files contained patterns that matched the collection's activities going back to the 1960s. There was always someone new after each wave of arrests or scandals, she explained. The collection would go quiet for a few years, then resurface under new leadership. It's like a hydra. Cut off one head, 2 more appear. The payment to Blackstone was traced to a shell company in the Bahamas, but the trail led eventually to someone unexpected. Michael Morrison, son of Elizabeth Morrison and heir to the Morrison entertainment empire. When arrested, Michael showed none of his mother's composure. At 35, he'd grown up surrounded by the collection's ideology, raised to see celebrities as commodities to be acquired and preserved. "You don't understand," he ranted during interrogation. "This is bigger than my mother, bigger than Blackstone. The collection has members in every major entertainment company, every talent agency, every studio. We're not criminals. We're the inevitable evolution of fame itself." His confession revealed the next generation of the collection, younger members who'd integrated modern technology into their preservation methods. They'd been developing digital consciousness mapping, attempting to preserve not just bodies but personalities, creating AI versions of deceased celebrities that could continue performing forever. "Physical preservation is outdated," Michael explained. "The future is digital immortality. We've already created perfect digital replicas of 12 deceased celebrities. They can star in new movies, record new songs, all generated by AI but indistinguishable from the real thing." The ethical implications were staggering. If the collection could digitally resurrect dead celebrities, who owned their likeness? Their families? The studios? The collection itself? The investigation uncovered a server farm in Nevada containing terabytes of data, detailed scans of preserved bodies, voice recordings, movement captures, psychological profiles. They hadn't just been preserving bodies, they'd been creating a database for digital resurrection. Among the data was something that chilled Blackthorne to his core: profiles of living celebrities marked for digital acquisition. The process involved extensive surveillance, recording every movement, every word, every expression, building a complete digital profile before the physical acquisition. Several celebrities discovered they'd been unknowingly motion captured during film productions, their data stolen and stored for future use. The collection had operatives in every major special effects company, siphoning off data meant for legitimate films. Thomas Brooks, a visual effects supervisor who came forward, revealed the extent of the infiltration. "We thought we were creating digital doubles for stunts and special effects," he said. "But certain shots, certain captures were being duplicated and sent to private servers. They were building a library of digital celebrities without anyone knowing." The legal ramifications were unprecedented. Several major films were pulled from release when it was discovered they contained illegally captured digital performances. Studios sued each other, claiming their intellectual property had been stolen. The entire entertainment industry was in chaos, but the investigation took its darkest turn when they raided Michael Morrison's private residence. In his basement, they found something that shouldn't have been possible: a living person who'd been declared dead 6 months earlier. It was David Park, a young actor who'd supposedly died in a hiking accident. He was alive but in a medically induced coma, connected to machines that were scanning his brain patterns continuously. "He's been legally dead for months," the attending physician explained after David was rushed to a hospital. His death certificate was filed, his family held a funeral. But he's been here, alive, being digitally mapped. They were creating a perfect digital copy while keeping the original as a reference. David's case revealed the collection's ultimate plan. They weren't just preserving the dead, they were creating a situation where the line between life and death became meaningless. A celebrity could be declared dead, their digital version continuing their career while their physical body was kept as a backup or template. When David finally woke, his testimony was harrowing. "I remember the hiking accident," he said. "I fell, hit my head. Then I woke up here, unable to move, unable to speak, watching them scan me over and over. They told me I was dead, that my digital self was living my life better than I ever could." The psychological torture was unimaginable. David had been forced to watch his digital replacement accept awards, give interviews, live his life, all while he was trapped in a basement. The investigation revealed 4 other celebrities in similar situations, declared dead but kept alive for digital mapping. Each rescue was a media sensation, dead celebrities returning to life, their digital replacements revealed as frauds. Walter Blackstone, from his cell, watched the news coverage with what seemed like satisfaction. "You think you've exposed us," he told Blackthorne during a final interview, "but you've only accelerated the inevitable. The technology exists now. The knowledge is out there. Some will use it legally, ethically, others won't. The collection never needed to be a secret society. It just needed to wait until society was ready to accept it. Society will never accept murder for entertainment, won't they? They already watch dead actors in films, listen to dead singers through recordings. We just took it one step further, and mark my words, Agent Blackthorne, within 20 years, what we did will be legal. Digital resurrection will be a standard Hollywood practice. We were just ahead of our time." The trials lasted for 2 years. Over 200 people were eventually charged in connection with the collection and its various incarnations. Sentences ranged from conspiracy to murder, with Blackstone and Elizabeth Morrison receiving life without parole. Michael Morrison was convicted on multiple counts, but received a lesser sentence in exchange for his cooperation in exposing the collection's digital operations. His testimony led to new laws regarding digital likeness rights and the definition of death in the age of AI. The Hollywood Hills Burial Society was officially disbanded, its assets liquidated and distributed to victims' families. The preserved bodies were returned to their families for proper burial, though some chose to maintain the preservation, unable to bear seeing their loved ones decay after so many years. The Riverside facility was converted into a memorial museum, documenting the collection's history as a warning against the commodification of human beings. Each preserved body that had been recovered was memorialized, their true stories told for the first time. But the most lasting impact was on Hollywood itself. The industry that had built itself on illusion was forced to confront the ultimate illusion: that fame could conquer death. New oversight committees were established. Regular audits of mortality records became standard, and any suspicious death triggered automatic federal investigation. Detective Margaret Whitfield, promoted after the case, established a new unit specifically focused on preventing celebrity exploitation. Her team monitored for signs of collection-style activities, investigating any unusual patterns in celebrity deaths or disappearances. "We know they're still out there," she told Blackthorne at the case's official closing. "Maybe not the collection specifically, but others with the same obsession. As long as people worship celebrity, someone will try to possess it permanently." A year after the trials ended, Blackthorne received a package at his home. No return address, but postmarked from Switzerland. Inside was a single photograph, a perfectly preserved body in an ornate display case. He didn't recognize the person, but the quality of preservation was unmistakable. On the back was written, "The work continues. A collector." He forwarded it to Interpol, but the trail went cold. The collection, or something like it, was still operating somewhere in the world. The technology had spread, the knowledge couldn't be contained, and the obsession with preserving beauty and fame was eternal. In his final report, Blackthorne wrote, "The Hollywood Hills Burial Society represented the dark extreme of celebrity worship, the desire to own, control, and preserve fame beyond death. We stopped this incarnation, but the underlying pathology remains. As long as society values celebrity above humanity, as long as we see famous people as commodities rather than individuals, organizations like the collection will continue to exist. The preservation technology, both physical and digital, is now widespread. What was once the province of a secret society is becoming mainstream science. The question is no longer whether we can preserve people after death, but whether we should, and more importantly, who gets to make that decision. The victims of the Hollywood Hills Burial Society were denied that choice. They were murdered, stolen, preserved against their will, all to satisfy the obsessions of collectors who saw them as objects d'art rather than human beings. Their stories serve as a warning. Fame is not immortality, and those who seek to capture it through violence will always be exposed. But vigilance is required. The collection operated for a century before we exposed them. How many other such organizations exist? How many bodies are displayed in private collections around the world? How many deaths were actually murders designed to acquire a celebrity at their peak? We may never know the full truth. Hollywood has always been built on secrets, and some secrets are buried too deep to ever fully excavate. But we've shined a light into the darkness, and perhaps that light will prevent future tragedies. The case is closed, but the investigation continues. Every suspicious death, every missing person, every grave that doesn't feel quite right. We watch, we investigate, we protect, because somewhere out there, a new collector is planning their next acquisition. And we'll be ready. The Hollywood Hills Burial Society was gone, but its legacy remained. A reminder that fame and beauty are temporary, that death comes to all, and that those who try to cheat that reality through murder and theft will always be brought to justice. In Los Angeles, the entertainment industry slowly recovered. New films were made, new stars were born, and life went on. But in certain circles, in whispered conversations at exclusive parties, people still talked about the collection. Some with horror, some with fascination, and some, disturbingly, with admiration. And in private mansions around the world, in hidden rooms known only to their owners, preserved bodies still stood in their display cases. The Hollywood Hills Burial Society was finished, but the collection in various forms would always exist. Because as long as humanity fears death and worships beauty, someone will try to preserve both, no matter the cost. The stars still shine over Hollywood, but now everyone knows that some of those lights are dead stars, their light reaching us long after they've burned out. And somewhere in the darkness between those stars, collectors wait, patient and obsessive, ready to capture the next falling star before it fades to black. The call came through to FBI Special Agent Jeremiah Coldwater on a rain-soaked Thursday morning in November 2003. Downtown Los Angeles was shrouded in an unseasonable storm, water streaming down the glass towers of the financial district, turning the streets into rivers. The call was from Inspector Constance Fairweather of the LAPD's Major Crimes Division, and her voice carried an urgency that cut through the drumming rain. "Jeremiah, we need federal involvement immediately. We've discovered something in the Bradbury building that, God, I don't even know how to describe it. You need to see this yourself." The Bradbury building was a Los Angeles landmark, an architectural marvel from 1893 with its ornate ironwork and sky-lit central court. It housed various businesses, from law firms to architectural studios. But what Inspector Fairweather had found was hidden beneath its historic facade. Coldwater arrived to find the building cordoned off, LAPD units blocking every entrance. Fairweather met him in the lobby, her usually composed demeanor shattered. "It started with a missing persons report," she explained, leading him to the old freight elevator. A paralegal named Jennifer Martinez hadn't shown up for work in 3 days. Her firm hired a private investigator who traced her last known location to here. He found something the regular maintenance crews had missed. The freight elevator descended past the basement, past the sub-basement, to a level that shouldn't have existed according to city records. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked more medical than historical, with white-tiled walls and fluorescent lighting. "This was all recently constructed," Fairweather said. "Within the last 2 years, we estimate. But there's no record of permits, no construction company records, nothing." They passed through a series of rooms that became increasingly disturbing. The first looked like a medical examination room. The second, an operating theater. The third made Coldwater stop in his tracks. It was a storage room, but instead of supplies, it contained what looked like a catalog system. Hundreds of files, each with photographs and medical information. But these weren't patient records. They were inventory listings. Human inventory. Each file contained detailed information about a person: blood type, organ compatibility, bone density, tissue matches, even aesthetic qualities like skin tone and eye color. Prices were listed next to each attribute. "They're selling people," Fairweather said quietly. "Not for trafficking in the traditional sense. They're selling them in pieces." The files revealed a systematized operation that treated human beings like a collection of spare parts. Kidneys were priced at $75,000, hearts at $200,000, corneas at $15,000 per pair. But it went beyond organs. Bone marrow, skin grafts, even hair and teeth had prices. One file caught Coldwater's attention. It was marked active and contained information about Jennifer Martinez, the missing paralegal. According to the file, she'd been acquired 3 days ago and was being processed for multiple clients. She could still be alive, Coldwater said, urgency entering his voice. This says processing is scheduled for tonight. They searched the rest of the sublevel, finding more operating rooms, recovery areas, and most disturbing holding cells. 3 were occupied. The victims inside were sedated but alive, including Jennifer Martinez. Paramedics carefully extracted the victims while Coldwater examined the rest of the facility. In what appeared to be an administrative office, he found evidence of the operation's scope. This wasn't just one location. It was the hub of a network spanning across Los Angeles' financial district. The organization called itself the Exchange, and it operated like a commodities market for human bodies. Clients would submit requests for specific organs or tissues, and the Exchange would find matches from their pool of assets: homeless people, undocumented immigrants, and young professionals who wouldn't be immediately missed. The client list was encrypted, but the communication logs revealed the operation's methodology. They had scouts who identified targets, acquisition teams who performed the kidnappings, medical teams who handled the harvesting, and a disposal unit that ensured no trace of the victims remained. Abraham Lockwood, listed as the facility manager in the files, was arrested at his home in Beverly Hills. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s, he showed no emotion as he was handcuffed. "You think you're saving people," he said to Coldwater, "but you're condemning those who could be saved. Every organ we harvested saved a life. We just redistributed life from those who wasted it to those who deserved it. You murdered innocent people. We maximized human resource utility. A drug addict's kidney saving a teacher, a criminal's heart beating in a philanthropist's chest. We improved society's overall value. The twisted economics of human life made Coldwater sick, but Lockwood seemed genuinely convinced of his moral superiority. The investigation expanded rapidly. The Bradbury Building was just one node in the Exchange's network. Using financial records and communication logs, they identified 4 other facilities in downtown Los Angeles, all hidden in the sublevels of historic buildings where construction could be done without attracting attention. Each facility had a specialty. One focused on blood and plasma harvesting, keeping victims alive for regular extraction. Another specialized in bone marrow, subjecting victims to painful repeated extractions. A third handled what they called cosmetic harvesting: skin, hair, even facial features for transplant. The most disturbing facility was in the basement of a defunct department store. This was where they kept children. 15 children, ages 6 to 17, were found in a state of medical suspension. They'd been kept sedated for weeks or months, their bodies treated as renewable resources. Blood drawn regularly, bone marrow harvested when needed, even growth hormones extracted for sale to anti-aging clinics. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the same pediatric specialist who'd worked on previous cases, was called in to treat the children. "These children show signs of repeated harvesting," she reported to Coldwater. "Non-lethal, but systematic extraction of renewable tissues. They've been treated like living factories." One child, a 12-year-old boy named David, had been in the facility for 6 months. His file showed he'd been acquired from a foster home, his disappearance explained as a runaway. He'd been selected for his O-negative blood type and unusual tissue compatibility markers that made him a universal donor for certain procedures. "They took from me," David said when he was finally able to speak. over and over. Blood, marrow, something from my spine. They said I was special, that I was helping important people. The psychological trauma was severe. The children had been told they were worthless except for what could be taken from them, that their only value was in their biological materials. Several had developed dissociative disorders, mentally separating themselves from their bodies to cope with the repeated violations. The investigation into the exchange's leadership led to a shocking discovery. The organization wasn't run by criminals in the traditional sense. It was operated by a consortium of medical professionals, insurance executives, and financial traders who saw an opportunity to apply market principles to organ allocation. The CEO, identified through encrypted communications as the broker, was revealed to be Harrison Sterling, a former Wall Street trader who'd moved to Los Angeles to escape securities fraud charges. He'd partnered with Dr. Michael Constantine, a transplant surgeon who'd lost his license for ethical violations, to create the exchange. Supply and demand, Sterling said when arrested. The organ donation system is inefficient. Thousands die waiting for organs while viable organs are buried or cremated. We created a more efficient market. You created a murder ring. We created a solution. Every transaction was voluntary. The buyers wanted to live. The sellers, well, their consent was implied by their lifestyle choices. The casual dehumanization was chilling. Sterling had spreadsheets that calculated the total value of a human body based on age, health, and genetic factors. He'd been planning to take the exchange public through cryptocurrency, creating a decentralized market for human organs that would be impossible to shut down. The client list, once decrypted, revealed the horrifying scope of complicity among Los Angeles' elite. CEOs who'd received hearts, celebrities who'd gotten kidney transplants, politicians who'd extended their lives with young blood transfusions, all had knowingly participated in the system. One client stood out. Margaret Morrison, a federal judge who'd received a liver transplant through the exchange. When confronted, she broke down completely. "I was dying," she sobbed. "The waiting list was 5 years and I had 6 months. They promised me the donor was a willing participant, someone who'd sold their organ to pay for their family's medical bills. Did you really believe that? I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But deep down, I knew, God help me, I knew. The web of complicity extended into law enforcement itself. 2 LAPD detectives had been paid to misdirect missing persons investigations, ensuring the exchange's victims were never found. A coroner's assistant had falsified death certificates, making victims officially dead even as they were being harvested in the facilities. The arrest of Harrison Sterling and Dr. Michael Constantine should have been the beginning of the end for the exchange, but Agent Jeremiah Coldwater quickly discovered they'd only scratched the surface of a much deeper operation. The organization had contingency plans, backup facilities, and a level of technological sophistication that suggested years of careful planning. Inspector Constance Fairweather had been analyzing the exchange's communication systems when she made a disturbing discovery. The organization used a proprietary app disguised as a financial trading platform. To casual observers, it looked like a stock market application, but the stocks being traded were code names for human organs, and the market prices reflected real-time demand for specific biological materials. "Look at this," Fairweather showed Coldwater her screen. KDMYA is trading at 75K, up 10% from last week. That's kidneys, type A blood. HRTO is at 200K, steady, hearts, type O. They've gamified human organ trafficking. The app had over 3,000 active users, mostly in Los Angeles, but with connections worldwide. Each user had a rating system, like eBay, where buyers and sellers rated their transactions. 5-star ratings for fresh product, timely delivery, and quality as advertised. One user, identified by the handle Collector Prime, had completed over 200 transactions. Their profile showed they specialized in what the exchange called exotic requests, rare blood types, unusual genetic markers, specific ethnic organ requirements for better compatibility. Coldwater obtained a warrant for the app's servers, located in a data center in downtown LA. What they found there changed the entire scope of the investigation. The exchange wasn't just trafficking organs. They were building a comprehensive genetic database of Los Angeles population. Through hacked medical records, illegally obtained DNA tests, and even samples collected from public places, they'd assembled genetic profiles on over 1 million Los Angeles residents. Each profile was tagged with location data, health information, and a calculated harvest value. They were treating the entire city like an organ farm, Coldwater told his superiors at an emergency briefing. Every person walking the streets of LA had been evaluated as a potential source of biological materials. The database revealed something even more sinister. The exchange had been performing what they called predictive acquisition, using artificial intelligence to identify people likely to become vulnerable. Recent job losses, medical bankruptcies, immigration status changes, all were factors that might make someone easier to acquire. Jennifer Martinez, the paralegal who'd been rescued from the Bradbury building, provided crucial testimony once she'd recovered enough to speak. "I was leaving work late," she recalled, her voice trembling. "Someone called my name, said they were from building security, that there'd been a break-in, and they needed to verify my office wasn't affected. I followed them to the freight elevator. Next thing I remember, I woke up in that cell. She'd been selected not randomly, but specifically. The exchange had identified her as a perfect match for 3 different clients needing various organs. Her acquisition had been planned for weeks, with surveillance of her routines, analysis of her schedule, even psychological profiling to determine the best approach method. The investigation uncovered the exchange's acquisition manual, a detailed guide for kidnapping victims without detection. It included sections on drug dosages for different body weights, techniques for avoiding security cameras, and scripts for various approach scenarios. It read like a corporate training manual, complete with flowcharts and best practices. One section particularly disturbed Coldwater. Titled Sustainable Harvesting, it outlined procedures for keeping victims alive while extracting renewable materials: blood, plasma, bone marrow, skin grafts. The manual calculated the maximum extraction rate that would keep a donor productive for months or even years. Abraham Lockwood, the facility manager arrested at the Bradbury building, eventually agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the organization's structure and the true identities of its leadership. "The exchange was founded 5 years ago," he explained during interrogation. "It started small, black market organ deals for desperate rich clients. But Sterling saw the potential for something bigger. He brought in venture capital." Venture capital? For organ trafficking? They didn't call it that. The pitch was for biological resource optimization and alternative transplant solutions. The investors were told it was about developing new preservation techniques and allocation systems. But once they were in, once they'd taken the money, they learned the truth. By then, they were complicit. The venture capital firm, Apex Innovations, was a legitimate business that had unknowingly funded the early stages of the exchange. When the partners discovered what they'd actually invested in, some tried to pull out. One partner, Robert Fitzgerald, had threatened to go to the authorities. Robert Fitzgerald had died in a car accident 3 months later. The investigation revealed his brake lines had been cut. The exchange had an enforcement division run by a former military contractor named Marcus Stone. Stone's team handled risk mitigation, eliminating threats to the organization, whether they were witnesses, defectors, or investigators who got too close. Inspector Fairweather discovered they'd been under surveillance themselves. Her apartment had been bugged, Coldwater's car had a tracking device, and both their phones had been compromised. The exchange had been watching the investigation from the beginning. "We need to move our families to safety," Fairweather told Coldwater after discovering the surveillance. "If they're willing to kill a venture capitalist, they won't hesitate with us." The FBI arranged protective custody for their families and switched to a secure command center at the federal building. But even there, they couldn't be sure of safety. The exchange's client list included people in law enforcement, government, and the justice system. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who'd been treating the rescued children, noticed something odd in their blood work. "They all have the same unusual marker," she reported. "A synthetic compound that doesn't occur naturally. It's like they've been tagged." Analysis revealed the compound was a tracking agent, allowing the exchange to monitor the location and health status of their assets even after release. But it also provided a way to identify other victims. A citywide health screening under the guise of a free clinic initiative identified 47 more people with the marker. All reported missing over the past 3 years, all officially presumed dead. 17 were found alive, living on the streets or in psychiatric facilities, with no memory of their time in the exchange's facilities. They'd been used, discarded, and their memories chemically suppressed. But their bodies bore the evidence: surgical scars, missing organs, signs of repeated harvesting. One survivor, Thomas Bradley, had been a successful architect before his kidnapping. Now he lived under a bridge, his mind fractured by what had been done to him. "They took pieces," he muttered when interviewed. "Every week something else. Blood, marrow, skin. They said I was helping people, but I could feel myself disappearing, bit by bit. When they were done, when I had nothing left to give, they dumped me on Skid Row." The horror stories accumulated. Each survivor had endured months of systematic harvesting, treated as nothing more than biological resource to be extracted. The psychological torture was as severe as the physical. Being conscious during some procedures, being told their only value was in what could be taken from them. The exchange's reach extended beyond Los Angeles. Communication records revealed connections to similar operations in New York, Chicago, Houston, and Miami. It was a national network, sharing resources, clients, and victims across state lines. The Miami operation had a particular specialty: harvesting from elderly residents of nursing homes. Families were told their loved ones had died naturally. Bodies were cremated before anyone could request an autopsy, and organs were harvested in between. Over 100 elderly victims were identified, their deaths now reclassified as homicides. In Chicago, the exchange had targeted the homeless population around Lower Wacker Drive. The underground streets had hidden their operations perfectly. Bodies found in the Chicago River, previously classified as suicides or accidents, showed evidence of organ removal. The New York operation was the most sophisticated, operating out of an abandoned subway station. They'd been performing experimental procedures, attempting face transplants, limb transfers, even neural tissue extraction for research into consciousness transfer. Dr. Constantine, during his interrogation, revealed the medical innovations the exchange had developed. "We advanced transplant medicine by decades," he claimed. "Our preservation techniques, our anti-rejection protocols, our tissue-matching algorithms, all revolutionary. Yes, the methods were unethical, but the knowledge gained will save millions." You experimented on human beings. We experimented with human beings. Every medical advance requires sacrifice. We just made the sacrifice involuntary. The cold rationalization of murder as medical progress was chilling. But Constantine revealed something else. The exchange had been selling their techniques to legitimate medical institutions, laundering their blood money through patent applications and research papers. Several major hospitals had unknowingly purchased preservation solutions developed through the exchange's experiments. Medical device companies had licensed tissue-matching algorithms refined through the systematic harvesting of the victims. The illegal organization had infected legitimate medicine. Meanwhile, the client list continued to reveal shocking names. A Hollywood studio executive who'd received a heart from a 22-year-old aspiring actress. A tech billionaire who'd had his blood regularly replaced with that of teenagers. A senator who'd received corneal transplants from a victim selected for their specific eye color. Each client claimed ignorance of the source, insisting they'd believed the organs were legally obtained. But financial records showed payments far exceeding normal transplant costs, and several had specifically requested attributes that would be impossible to guarantee through normal donation. One client, Miranda Hutchinson, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, had received what the exchange called a full renewal package. Multiple organs and tissues replaced over a 2-year period. She'd paid $12 million for procedures that had required 4 victims. When arrested at her Bel Air mansion, she showed no remorse. "I paid for a service," she said. "Supply and demand. If people are willing to sell their organs, who am I to refuse? And if they weren't willing, well, that's not my responsibility." The casual dismissal of murder for her personal benefit revealed the mindset of the exchange's clientele. They saw themselves as deserving life more than their victims, their wealth as justification for any crime. Coldwater received a call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice was electronically disguised. "Agent Coldwater, you're interfering with natural selection. The weak feed the strong. The poor sustain the rich. It's been this way throughout history. The exchange just made it more efficient." Who is this? Someone who understands that your investigation is futile. Shut down the exchange, and another will take its place. The demand doesn't disappear. The rich will always find ways to buy what the poor are forced to sell. The caller hung up before the trace could complete, but the threat was clear. The exchange had supporters, people who believed in their vision of commercialized human harvesting. The investigation team received death threats, attempts at bribery, and offers of disappearance if they continued. Fairweather's home was broken into, though nothing was taken. A message that they could get to her whenever they wanted. Coldwater found a package on his doorstep containing a preserved human heart with a note. Yours could be next. But they pressed on. Using the exchange's own technology against them, they traced the app's users, identifying and arresting over 300 participants in the network. Each arrest revealed more connections, more facilities, more victims. A warehouse in Vernon was discovered to be a processing center where bodies were disposed of after harvesting. Industrial-grade cremation equipment had reduced hundreds of victims to ash, their remains scattered in the Pacific. The operator, a man named Vincent Gray, showed investigators detailed logs of every body processed. 3 to 5 per week for the past 4 years, he said matter-of-factly. They came in refrigerated trucks already harvested. My job was just disposal. I didn't ask questions. The logs contained names, dates, and what had been harvested from each victim. It was a catalog of horror. Hundreds of people reduced to inventory lists and disposal records. Families who'd spent years searching for missing loved ones finally had answers, though the truth was worse than any uncertainty. The investigation revealed the exchange's future plans, found in encrypted files on Sterling's personal computer. They'd been developing what they called Project Renewal, a subscription service for the ultra-wealthy that would provide regular biological updates. New organs as old ones failed, young blood for anti-aging. Even genetic modifications using harvested DNA from superior specimens. The service would have cost $10 million per year, with guaranteed access to any needed biological materials within 48 hours. They'd already signed up 23 clients for the beta program, each providing detailed genetic profiles and wish lists for enhancement. One client had requested the eyes of an artist, believing they would enhance his appreciation of beauty. Another wanted the hands of a concert pianist, thinking they would grant musical ability. The magical thinking behind these requests showed how the exchange had been selling not just organs, but fantasies of transformation. Dr. Constantine had been developing the procedures for these transfers, despite knowing that many were medically impossible. Hands couldn't grant skill, eyes couldn't transfer artistic vision. But the exchange had been willing to let clients believe anything that would make them pay. Among the evidence was video documentation of procedures, recorded for quality control purposes. Coldwater couldn't watch more than a few minutes. Conscious victims being systematically disassembled, their organs removed with industrial efficiency while they were still alive enough to suffer. One video showed Sterling himself observing a harvesting, taking notes like a factory manager overseeing production. His complete detachment from the human suffering in front of him revealed a psychopathy that masqueraded as business acumen. The task force identified the exchange's primary surgeons, 12 doctors who'd lost their licenses or fled from other countries to avoid prosecution. They'd been given new identities, luxury accommodations, and millions in payment for their participation. Each had performed dozens of illegal harvesting operations, becoming more efficient with practice. The raid on the exchange's surgical teams happened simultaneously across Los Angeles at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Agent Jeremiah Coldwater personally led the team that arrested Dr. Constantine at his hidden residence in Manhattan Beach. The doctor was in his study, calmly destroying documents when the FBI breached his door. "You're too late," Constantine said, watching papers burn in his fireplace. "The important information is already gone, and what you'll find won't stop what's coming. What's coming? The evolution of the exchange. We were just the beginning, the crude first attempt. The next generation has already learned from our mistakes. They'll be invisible, integrated into legitimate medicine so deeply you'll never find them." Constantine's words proved prophetic. As the investigation deepened, they discovered the exchange had spawned imitators, competitors, and successors. The organ trafficking market they'd created had become self-sustaining, with new players moving in to fill the vacuum. Inspector Constance Fairweather had been tracking the financial networks when she uncovered something that changed the entire investigation. The exchange's profits, over $2 billion in 5 years, hadn't disappeared with the arrests. The money had been moved through a complex web of cryptocurrency transactions, shell companies, and offshore accounts. But the trail led to an unexpected destination, a legitimate biotech company called Renewal Sciences. Renewal Sciences was publicly traded, with offices in downtown Los Angeles' newest skyscraper. On paper, they developed organ preservation technology and synthetic tissue alternatives. Their board included respected scientists, former FDA officials, and prominent investors. But Fairweather found connections that suggested Renewal Sciences was the exchange's legitimate face, laundering their profits and research through legal channels. The CEO of Renewal Sciences was Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, a renowned transplant surgeon who'd pioneered several legitimate techniques for organ preservation. When Coldwater and Fairweather arrived at her office with a warrant, she received them with calm professionalism. "I assume this is about the unfortunate connections between some of our research and the exchange," she said, her voice carrying a slight British accent. "We've been cooperating fully with authorities. We had no knowledge that some of our theoretical research was being applied illegally. Your company received over $300 million in investments that trace back to the exchange's operations," Coldwater stated. "We received investments from venture capital firms. We don't investigate the source of every dollar. That would be impossible in modern finance. But the investigation of Renewal Sciences revealed something far more sinister. They weren't just laundering the exchange's money. They were preparing to legitimize their entire operation. Files discovered on encrypted servers showed a 10-year plan to gradually normalize organ trading through legislative lobbying, medical journal publications, and public relations campaigns. The plan, titled the Transition Protocol, outlined steps to make organ selling legal by 2015. First, they would promote compensated donation for renewable materials like blood and plasma. Then expand to single kidneys from living donors. Eventually, they aimed to create a regulated market for all human organs, where the poor could legally sell their bodies to the rich. "It's brilliant in its evil," Fairweather told Coldwater as they reviewed the documents. They were going to make organ trafficking legal by calling it something else: biological resource sharing, or compensated anatomical gifts. The investigation team discovered that Renewal Sciences had been conducting legitimate research alongside their illegal activities. They'd developed revolutionary preservation techniques that could keep organs viable for weeks instead of hours. They'd created synthetic blood substitutes that were superior to anything currently available. They'd even pioneered techniques for growing organs from stem cells, though these required starter material harvested from unwilling donors. Dr. Harrington maintained her innocence throughout interrogation, insisting she was a scientist, not a criminal. But her personal files revealed she'd been fully aware of the exchange's operations. She'd even selected some victims herself, choosing them for specific genetic markers needed in her research. One file contained her notes on a young man named Christopher Reeves, no relation to the actor, a college student who disappeared 6 months earlier. She'd selected him for his rare blood type and a genetic mutation that gave his organs unusual compatibility with multiple recipients. Her notes clinically described his harvesting schedule and the research applications for each organ. Christopher was found alive in a Renewal Sciences facility, hidden within their legitimate laboratory. He'd been kept in a medically induced coma for months, his body used as a living organ farm. When he was finally awakened, his testimony was heartbreaking. "I remember fragments," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Being aware, but unable to move or speak. Feeling them cutting into me, taking things. They told me I was serving science, that my sacrifice would save hundreds. But I never agreed to sacrifice anything. The number of victims continued to grow. Renewal Sciences had been operating their own acquisition network, more sophisticated than the exchange's crude kidnappings. They targeted people with specific genetic traits, rare blood types, or unusual immunological profiles. They would approach them with legitimate-seeming medical studies, offering thousands of dollars for participation. Once the victims were in the facility, they never left. The investigation revealed that Renewal Sciences had partnerships with several major hospitals, providing them with organs that were documented as legitimate donations. The hospitals claimed ignorance, but the sheer volume of organs from a single source should have raised questions. In 1 year, Renewal Sciences had provided over 500 organs to Los Angeles area hospitals, more than all other sources combined. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who'd been treating victims throughout the investigation, made a disturbing discovery when examining Christopher Reeves. "He's been genetically modified," she reported to Coldwater. "His bone marrow has been altered to produce a universal donor blood type. They didn't just harvest from him, they turned him into a biological factory. The modifications were irreversible. Christopher would spend the rest of his life producing blood that wasn't quite his own, his body permanently altered to serve the exchange's purposes. Several other victims showed similar modifications, altered to be better sources of whatever materials the exchange wanted to harvest." The investigation took a personal turn when Coldwater received a visit from his own doctor, who'd discovered something during a routine physical. "Jeremiah, you have a surgical scar that doesn't match any procedure in your medical history," the doctor said. "It's about 6 months old, consistent with a kidney biopsy. Have you had any procedures you haven't told me about?" Coldwater hadn't, but reviewing his schedule, he found a 3-day period 6 months earlier when he'd been sick with what he thought was food poisoning. He'd been barely conscious, attributing it to a bad restaurant meal. But now, with the scar as evidence, he realized he'd been drugged and biopsied. The exchange had been evaluating him as a potential target. His medical records from that period had been altered, showing treatment for gastroenteritis at a clinic that, upon investigation, didn't exist. Someone had covered up whatever had been done to him. Testing revealed he still had both kidneys, but tissue samples had been taken. Apparently, he'd been evaluated and rejected as unsuitable for their purposes. "They were shopping," Fairweather said when she learned what had happened, "testing law enforcement to see if we were viable targets. You were lucky. Something in your tests made you not worth the risk." The revelation that the exchange had been evaluating members of law enforcement for harvesting sent shockwaves through the FBI and LAPD. Emergency medical screenings revealed 17 other officers and agents with unexplained scars or missing tissue samples. The exchange had been systematically evaluating their enemies for potential harvesting. Abraham Lockwood, the facility manager who'd been cooperating, revealed more about this program during a follow-up interrogation. "Sterling called it risk conversion," Lockwood explained. Anyone who posed a threat to the exchange was evaluated for harvesting potential. If they were suitable, they'd disappear. If not, they'd be monitored and potentially eliminated through other means. "How many law enforcement officers did you harvest?" "3 that I know of. 2 LAPD detectives who got too close to discovering our operations, and 1 FBI agent from the San Diego office who was investigating our financial networks." The names he provided matched 3 unsolved disappearances of law enforcement personnel over the past 3 years. Their bodies were never found, and now Coldwater knew why. They'd been harvested and disposed of, like all the exchange's other victims. The investigation expanded to include internal affairs, searching for inside sources who'd help the exchange identify and target law enforcement. They found 2 corrupted officers in the LAPD and 1 administrative assistant in the FBI's Los Angeles office who'd been selling information. The administrative assistant, Nancy Torres, broke down when confronted with evidence. "They had my daughter," she sobbed. "They said if I didn't help them, she'd become inventory. I gave them schedules, medical records, anything they wanted. I'm so sorry. Her daughter was found alive in the exchange safe house, being held as leverage over several other blackmailed informants." The exchange had been using kidnapped family members to control dozens of people in key positions throughout Los Angeles. As the full scope of the exchange's operations became clear, the death toll rose. Conservative estimates suggested they'd killed over 800 people in 5 years, with possibly hundreds more whose bodies were never found. They'd operated with impunity in one of America's largest cities, protected by corruption, wealth, and fear. The trials began 6 months after the initial raids. Harrison Sterling, facing multiple life sentences, attempted to present himself as a visionary businessman who'd simply applied market principles to an inefficient system. His defense argued that he'd never personally killed anyone, that he was just a facilitator for transactions between willing parties. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Roth, systematically destroyed this defense. They presented victim after victim, showing the jury the human cost of Sterling's market efficiency. Parents who'd lost children, children who'd lost parents, survivors bearing scars both physical and mental. Jennifer Martinez, the paralegal who'd been rescued from the first raid, testified about her experience. "They talked about me like I was a car being stripped for parts," she said, her voice steady despite visible trembling. "They discussed my organ's market value while I was conscious, unable to move but able to hear everything. They weren't treating me as human. To them, I was just inventory with a pulse." Dr. Constantine's trial revealed the medical atrocities in detail. The prosecution presented his surgical logs, showing he'd performed over 300 illegal organ harvesting operations. His techniques were sophisticated, keeping victims alive as long as possible to maximize harvest potential. One log entry was particularly chilling. Subject 247 proved remarkably resilient, surviving extraction of kidney, partial liver, and bone marrow. Recommend similar genetic profile for future acquisitions. Note: sedation levels should be increased as subject showed signs of awareness during hepatic resection. The casual notation of a conscious victim experiencing their own organ removal caused several jury members to visibly recoil. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington's trial was more complex. Her lawyers argued she was a legitimate scientist whose research had been corrupted by criminals. They presented her genuine medical innovations, her published papers, her awards, and recognition from medical institutions. But the prosecution showed her direct involvement in victim selection, her personal notes on harvesting schedules, and most damningly, video footage of her observing illegal procedures at Renewal Sciences facilities. In one video, she could be heard directing the removal of a heart from a victim who was still alive, kept breathing by machines to preserve organ viability. "Careful with the ascending aorta," her voice said clearly. "We need that intact for the research protocol." The victim in the video was identified as Maria Santos, a 23-year-old nursing student who disappeared a year earlier. Her parents were in the courtroom when the video was shown. Their anguished cries led to a temporary recess. Marcus Stone, the enforcement division leader, was tried for multiple murders, including Robert Fitzgerald, the venture capitalist who'd threatened to expose the exchange. Stone showed no remorse, maintaining throughout his trial that he was a soldier following orders in a war for human evolution. "The weak have always fed the strong," he said during his allocution. "We just made the process more efficient. In nature, the sick and weak die to feed predators and scavengers. We simply redirected that natural process to benefit humanity's strongest members." His complete lack of empathy and his view of human life as a commodity to be managed chilled even hardened court observers. He was sentenced to death, though California's moratorium on executions meant he would likely die of old age on death row. The trials of the exchange's clients were equally revealing. Many claimed ignorance, but financial records and communications showed they knew exactly what they were buying. Some tried to justify their actions as survival instinct, arguing anyone would do the same when facing death. Margaret Morrison, the federal judge who'd received an illegal liver transplant, was stripped of her position and sentenced to 20 years. Her testimony revealed the mindset of the exchange's wealthy clients. "When you're dying, moral clarity disappears, she said. All you see is survival. The exchange offered life, and I took it. I told myself the donor was already dead, that refusing wouldn't bring them back. But I knew. Deep down, I knew someone had died for me to live. The investigation's final phase involved dismantling the exchange's international connections. Working with Interpol, the FBI identified similar operations in 7 countries, all sharing techniques, clients, and sometimes victims with the Los Angeles network. In Mexico City, authorities raided a facility that had been receiving victims from Los Angeles, harvesting them for wealthy Mexican and Central American clients. The facility was run by Dr. Constantine's former partner, who'd fled the U.S. years earlier. In Vancouver, Canadian authorities discovered the exchange had been trafficking organs across the border, using diplomatic pouches and medical courier services to avoid detection. Several Canadian politicians and business leaders were implicated as clients. The most disturbing discovery came from investigating the exchange's research division. In a storage facility in Riverside County, investigators found preserved tissue samples from thousands of victims. The exchange had been building a genetic library, collecting DNA from everyone they'd harvested. Dr. Harrington, in a moment of candor during her sentencing, revealed the purpose. "We were preparing for the future of medicine," she said. Personalized organs grown from stem cells, genetic modifications tailored to individual recipients, even consciousness transfer using neural mapping from preserved brain tissue. The exchange was crude, yes, but it was gathering the raw materials for medical miracles. "You murdered people for theoretical research," the judge responded before sentencing her to life without parole. The investigation's impact rippled through Los Angeles for years. The medical establishment implemented new oversight procedures for organ donation and transplantation. Background checks became mandatory for all transplant surgeons. A new federal task force was created specifically to monitor organ trafficking. But the demand that had created the exchange remained. Within a year of the trial's ending, investigators detected new networks forming, more careful and sophisticated than the exchange had been. The technology and knowledge couldn't be uninvented, and desperate people with money would always seek what others had naturally. Coldwater, promoted after the successful investigation, found himself heading the new Biological Trafficking Task Force. His mission was to prevent another exchange from forming, but he knew it was like trying to hold back the tide. "We stopped the exchange," he said in a speech to new agents. "But we didn't stop the hunger that created it. The wealthy still fear death. The poor still have organs to sell, and someone will always be willing to broker that transaction. Our job is eternal vigilance, to make the cost of organ trafficking so high that even the desperate won't attempt it." Inspector Fairweather, also promoted, focused on the financial side, tracking cryptocurrency transactions and unusual medical equipment purchases that might indicate new trafficking networks forming. She'd developed algorithms that could detect the financial signatures of organ trafficking, though traffickers constantly evolved their methods to avoid detection. The aftermath of the exchange trials should have been a victory for justice, but Agent Jeremiah Coldwater knew better. 6 months after the last verdict, sitting in his new office as head of the Biological Trafficking Task Force, he was reviewing intelligence that suggested the exchange had been just one tentacle of something much larger and more ancient than anyone had imagined. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who'd been treating victims throughout the investigation, had noticed something in the historical medical records she'd been reviewing for context. Similar patterns of disappearances and unexplained surgical knowledge had appeared throughout Los Angeles history, going back to the city's founding. "Look at this," she told Coldwater, spreading old newspaper clippings and medical journals across his desk. 1923. Mysterious disappearances in downtown LA. Bodies found with surgical precision organ removal. 1947. A ring of doctors arrested for illegal transplant experiments, though transplants weren't supposed to be possible yet. 1968. Mass graves discovered in Griffith Park with evidence of organ harvesting. Every 20 to 30 years, the same pattern. The implication was staggering. The exchange hadn't been an innovation, but the latest iteration of something that had existed in Los Angeles for over a century. Each generation had refined the techniques, expanded the network, and passed the knowledge to the next. Inspector Constance Fairweather had been investigating Renewal Science's historical connections when she discovered something that confirmed Dr. Hoffman's theory. In the basement of the old Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's building, scheduled for demolition, she found records that had been deliberately hidden. The records dated back to 1891 and documented what they called the Anatomical Society, a group of doctors who'd been performing illegal organ experiments on Chinese immigrants in what was then LA's Chinatown. The techniques described were primitive, but showed understanding of organ transplantation that wouldn't be discovered officially for another 60 years. One name appeared repeatedly in these records: Dr. Josiah Sterling, Harrison Sterling's great-great-grandfather. It's a family business, Fairweather told Coldwater, passed down through generations, evolving with technology, but maintaining the same core principle: the wealthy deserve to live at the expense of the poor. This discovery led to a complete re-examination of the exchange investigation. They weren't dealing with a criminal organization, but a hereditary conspiracy that had shaped Los Angeles development for over a century. The city's major hospitals, medical schools, and research institutions had all been infiltrated or influenced by this shadow network. Harrison Sterling, from his federal prison cell, finally agreed to a full interview when confronted with this evidence. His demeanor had changed. No longer the defiant businessman, but someone who seemed relieved to finally tell the truth. "You have to understand," Sterling began, "I was raised for this. From childhood, I was taught that we were shepherds of human evolution, that the masses existed to serve the advancement of the exceptional few. My father showed me my first harvesting when I was 12. He said it was our family's sacred duty." Sacred duty? The Anatomical Society, the collectors, the exchange, different names for the same mission: to ensure that death doesn't claim the valuable, that brilliant minds and capable bodies aren't lost to random disease or accident. We redistribute life from those who waste it to those who maximize it. Sterling revealed that the organization had members in every major family in Los Angeles, high society. Generations of doctors, politicians, and business leaders had been part of the conspiracy, either as operators or clients. The city itself had been shaped by their influence. "Why do you think Los Angeles became the center of the entertainment industry?" Sterling asked. "Beautiful people, desperate for fame, willing to do anything for success. The perfect harvest ground. Hollywood was built on our foundation. The investigation files from the 1947 arrests that Dr. Hoffman had found contained interrogation transcripts that were chilling in their similarity to the current case. A Dr. Marcus Constantine, Dr. Michael Constantine's grandfather, had said almost identical things about the necessity of biological redistribution and the evolution of mankind through selective preservation. The generational conspiracy explained something that had puzzled investigators: how the exchange had operated so smoothly, with such sophisticated techniques and established networks. They'd inherited decades of knowledge, contacts, and infrastructure. Abraham Lockwood, the facility manager who'd been cooperating, revealed more about this inherited system. "There are archives," he said during a late-night interrogation. hidden libraries containing medical knowledge that's decades ahead of public science. Techniques developed through thousands of illegal procedures, documented and refined over generations. The exchange didn't invent anything. We just modernized what already existed. Where are these archives? Scattered throughout the city. Some in private collections, some in university basements, some in places you'd never think to look. The city sits on a foundation of hidden knowledge built from human suffering. The task force began a systematic search of Los Angeles historical buildings, medical institutions, and private estates. What they found rewrote the history of medical advancement. In the basement of the University of Southern California's medical library, behind a wall that hadn't been opened since the 1960s, they found thousands of documents detailing illegal medical experiments. Organ transplants performed decades before they were supposedly possible. Anti-rejection drugs developed through systematic testing on unwilling subjects, surgical techniques that mainstream medicine was only now discovering. One document, dated 1934, described a successful heart transplant, 33 years before Dr. Christian Barnard's first human heart transplant. The recipient was identified only as Subject 12, but financial records suggested it was a prominent banker who'd lived another 10 years after the procedure. The donor was listed as Vagrant Oriental, approximately 25 years. The casual racism and dehumanization in the records showed how the organization had justified their actions. Immigrants, minorities, the poor, all were seen as resources to be harvested for the benefit of the white, wealthy elite. In a Pasadena mansion that had belonged to the exchange's founders, investigators found something even more disturbing: preserved specimens dating back to the 1920s. Hearts, brains, and other organs floating in custom preservation solutions, each labeled with the donor's ethnicity and the recipient's name. It was a museum of murder, displaying trophies of the organization's history. Among these specimens was something that shouldn't have been possible: a preserved brain dated 1952 with neural implants that looked remarkably modern. The accompanying notes described attempts at consciousness preservation and neural pattern mapping using techniques that modern science was only beginning to explore. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, from her prison cell, was confronted with these historical documents. Her composed demeanor finally cracked. "You don't understand the full scope," she said. "The exchange, the historical societies, they're all part of something bigger. There's a global network, thousands of years old, dedicated to preserving and advancing certain bloodlines through any means necessary. That's conspiracy theory nonsense. Is it? How do you think certain families maintain power for centuries? How do some people seem to live remarkably long, healthy lives while others die young? There's a hidden system of biological privilege that's been operating since ancient Egypt. The exchange was just the Los Angeles branch." While her claims seemed fantastical, investigation revealed disturbing evidence that supported at least part of her theory. Communications between the exchange and similar organizations in London, Rome, Beijing, and Cairo suggested a coordinated global network sharing techniques and resources. One intercepted message referenced the Eternal Council and discussed bloodline preservation protocols that had been in place for centuries. Another mentioned the Great Harvest of 2025, apparently a planned global operation to acquire specific genetic materials from targeted populations. The investigation uncovered the exchange's breeding program, something even Sterling claimed not to know about. In a facility in Bakersfield, investigators found evidence that the exchange had been selectively breeding humans for optimal organ compatibility and genetic traits. 32 women had been kept in the facility, impregnated with genetically selected sperm, Their children raised specifically to be organ donors. The children, ranging from infants to teenagers, had been told they were in a special boarding school for gifted students. In reality, they were being raised as livestock, their bodies monitored and optimized for eventual harvesting. The rescue of these children created an ethical nightmare. They'd been bred and raised for a specific purpose, educated to believe their destiny was to contribute their organs to society. Several of the older teenagers resisted rescue, insisting they wanted to fulfill their purpose. One 16-year-old boy, identified only as Subject 7A in the records, told investigators, "I was created to save lives. My organs are perfectly compatible with multiple recipients. By sacrificing myself, I can save 7 people." How is that not noble? The psychological conditioning was so complete that it took months of therapy for these children to understand they had value beyond their biological materials. Several attempted suicide when prevented from being harvested, believing their lives were meaningless if they couldn't fulfill their intended purpose. The investigation revealed that the exchange had been planning to expand the breeding program, creating entire communities of genetically optimized humans raised for harvesting. They'd purchased land in Nevada, filed paperwork for a religious commune, and were preparing to create what they called the farm, a self-sustaining community producing human organs on an industrial scale. The plans for the farm were sophisticated, including educational systems, recreational facilities, and even a breeding protocol to ensure genetic diversity. The children would be raised believing they were part of a religious community dedicated to serving humanity through biological gifts. Only the leadership would know the true purpose. Dr. Constantine, during his final interrogation before being sentenced to death, revealed the philosophical underpinnings of the farm project. "We were creating a more honest society," he said. "Currently, the poor sell their health, their time, their bodies in indirect ways, through dangerous labor, military service, medical testing. We were simply making the transaction direct and efficient. The farm's residents would live good lives, better than they would have in poverty, and their eventual contribution would be voluntary, even celebrated. You were planning to raise human beings as cattle. We were planning to give purpose to lives that would otherwise be wasted in poverty and suffering." Every major civilization has had a servant class. We were simply optimizing the relationship between servants and masters. The complete lack of recognition that he was discussing human beings, not resources, showed the depth of the organization's moral corruption. Generations of indoctrination had created people who genuinely couldn't see the poor as fully human. Meanwhile, new victims of the exchange continued to surface. The organization had been larger than anyone imagined, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of Los Angeles society. Hospitals reported patients who'd received organs they couldn't account for. Funeral homes discovered bodies that had been secretly harvested before burial, and missing persons cases going back decades were suddenly solved. One victim's story stood out. Maria Rodriguez, a 60-year-old woman, came forward with a story that spanned 3 generations. Her grandmother had disappeared in 1934, her mother in 1967, and her daughter in 2001. All had been taken by different iterations of the same organization. "They've been hunting my family for 90 years, she said through tears. "We have a rare genetic marker that makes us universal donors for certain procedures. They've been harvesting us like we're a renewable resource." Investigation confirmed her story. The organization had maintained genetic records on certain families for generations, tracking them, evaluating them, and harvesting them when needed. It was selective breeding through murder, creating and maintaining genetic lines specifically for their organs. The international investigation expanded, with Interpol coordinating raids in 17 countries. Each raid revealed more of the global network, more evidence of centuries-old conspiracies, more of victims whose suffering had been hidden by wealth and power. In London, authorities discovered that the organization had infiltrated the Royal Medical Society, using their resources to perform illegal transplants for European nobility. In Beijing, investigators found evidence of industrial-scale harvesting from political prisoners, their organs sold through the exchange's network. In Cairo, ancient documents suggested the practice dated back to the pharaohs, with mummification techniques designed to preserve organs for future use. The full scope was beyond comprehension. Tens of thousands of victims over centuries, millions of dollars in profits, and a hidden medical history built on murder and exploitation. The exchange hadn't been a criminal organization. It had been a parallel medical system operating in shadow beside legitimate medicine. As the trials concluded and sentences were handed down, Coldwater knew the victory was incomplete. The exchange was finished, but the knowledge they'd developed, the techniques they'd perfected, and the demand they'd served all remained. Somewhere, in hidden facilities around the world, the work continued. New organizations were already forming, more careful and sophisticated than the exchange. They used artificial intelligence to identify victims, cryptocurrency to hide transactions, and 3D printed organs to supplement their harvesting. The technology was advancing faster than law enforcement could adapt. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who'd become the leading expert on treating victims of organ trafficking, established the Renewal Foundation, a legitimate organization dedicated to developing ethical alternatives to organ transplantation. Using knowledge gained from the exchange's research, but applied ethically, they were making genuine breakthroughs in organ cultivation and synthetic replacements. "We can't uninvent the knowledge," she told Coldwater during the Foundation's opening, "but we can make it obsolete. If we can grow organs ethically, if we can create synthetic alternatives, we remove the market for harvested organs." Inspector Fairweather, now Deputy Chief of the LAPD's Biological Crimes Division, had developed predictive algorithms that could identify potential organ trafficking operations before they fully formed. Her team monitored medical equipment purchases, tracked unusual financial patterns, and investigated any clusters of disappearances that matched the exchange's victim profiles. "We're in an arms race," she explained to her team. "They evolve, we adapt. They hide, we seek. It's a war that will never end, but every victim we save, every operation we stop, is a victory." The children rescued from the breeding facility were placed in a special rehabilitation program. Some adapted to normal life, but others struggled with the existential crisis of living without their predetermined purpose. 2 committed suicide, leaving notes saying they felt worthless without the ability to save lives through their organs. The survivors of the exchange's harvesting operations formed a support group, meeting monthly in a community center in downtown LA. They shared their stories, their struggles with physical and psychological scars, and their efforts to rebuild lives that had been shattered. Jennifer Martinez, the paralegal whose rescue had started the entire investigation, became an advocate for organ trafficking victims. She testified before Congress, pushing for stronger laws and better victim support. "We're not just victims," she said in her testimony. "We're evidence of humanity's capacity for evil, but also its capacity for survival. We lived through being reduced to spare parts, and we're reclaiming our humanity. But we need support, recognition, and most importantly, assurance that this will never happen again." Abraham Lockwood died in prison, but not before providing investigators with one final piece of information. On his deathbed, he revealed the location of the exchange's ultimate archive, a bunker in the San Gabriel Mountains containing the complete history of the organization, all their research, and most disturbingly, their future plans. The bunker was a tomb of knowledge, containing medical breakthroughs built on suffering, surgical techniques developed through murder, and philosophical justifications for treating humans as biological resources. It also contained something unexpected: regret. In personal journals from organization members going back decades, investigators found doubts, guilt, and recognition of the evil they were committing. But each generation had convinced itself that they were too deep to stop, that the knowledge was too valuable to waste, that someone else would continue if they didn't. One journal, from a doctor in the 1960s, was particularly poignant. "I became a doctor to save lives. Now I take them. I tell myself it's for the greater good, that one death saves many, but I see their faces when I close my eyes. We've become monsters in the name of medicine, but the knowledge we've gained could revolutionize healthcare if it could somehow be separated from its bloody source." Dr. Harrington died in prison of natural causes, though some suspected she'd been poisoned by former associates ensuring her silence. But the true perpetrators, the centuries-old network that had created and sustained these operations, remained largely untouched. They retreated into shadow, waiting for public attention to fade, for new technologies to provide new opportunities, for the next iteration of their ancient trade. 5 years after the exchange's dismantling, Coldwater retired, exhausted by the weight of what he'd seen. In his final report, he wrote, "We stopped the exchange, but we didn't stop the idea that animated it, that some lives are worth more than others, that the poor exist to serve the rich, that survival of the privileged justifies any atrocity. Until we address these fundamental inequalities, until we create a society where every life has equal value, organizations like the Exchange will continue to emerge. The trafficking of human organs is not just a crime. It's a symptom of a diseased society that values wealth over humanity. We've treated the symptom, but the disease remains. Future generations will face new versions of the Exchange, more sophisticated and hidden, unless we fundamentally change how we value human life. The victims of the Exchange deserved better than to be reduced to their biological components. They deserved to live full lives, to make their own choices, to be valued for who they were, not what could be taken from them. We failed them as a society long before the Exchange took them. This investigation revealed not just a criminal conspiracy, but a hidden history of medical advancement built on murder. Every organ transplant, every medical breakthrough, carries the shadow of those who died unwillingly for that knowledge. We cannot undo the past, but we must ensure it doesn't repeat. The Exchange is finished, but somewhere, in some city, another organization is forming. Another group of people who see humans as resources to be harvested. Another iteration of humanity's oldest crime, the powerful consuming the powerless. Our work is not done. It will never be done. As long as inequality exists, as long as desperation drives some and greed drives others, as long as human bodies have value beyond the lives they contain, the Exchange will exist in one form or another. We can only remain vigilant, save who we can, and hope that someday humanity will evolve beyond seeing each other as spare parts. The downtown Los Angeles financial district returned to normal, its glass towers reflecting the California sun, hiding no more secret harvesting facilities. But those who knew the truth could never look at those buildings the same way. They knew that beneath the veneer of civilization, in hidden rooms and forgotten basements, humanity's darkest impulses had been given form. The Bradbury Building was renovated, its basement sealed, its hidden levels filled with concrete. But employees reported strange sounds at night, whispers in the walls, and some swore they could still smell disinfectant and blood. The building's management denied these reports, but security guards quit regularly, unwilling to patrol the lower levels alone. The victims' memorial was built in Grand Park, a simple stone monument listing the confirmed dead. But the list grew longer each year as more victims were identified, more connections made to the exchange's century-long operation. Families came to mourn people who disappeared decades ago, finally having answers to questions that had haunted them. Inspector Fairweather, now Chief Fairweather, kept a map in her office marking every location where the exchange had operated. Red pins for confirmed sites, yellow for suspected, green for cleaned and cleared. But new pins appeared regularly, the map never quite complete, the network never fully exposed. And in the shadows of Los Angeles, in other cities around the world, new exchanges were forming, more careful, more hidden, learning from the exchange's mistakes. The market for human organs continued, the demand never satisfied, the supply always insufficient. The war between those who would harvest humans and those who would protect them continued, invisible to most, vital to all. Each victory was temporary, each defeat potentially fatal. Each day a new battle in humanity's struggle to recognize its own humanity. The exchange was gone, but its legacy remained. In the knowledge gained from suffering, in the techniques developed through murder, in the recognition that given the right circumstances anyone could become either predator or prey in the market for human flesh. Los Angeles healed, as it always did, covering its scars with sunshine and glamour. But underneath, in the dark spaces between what was known and what was hidden, the city remembered, and waited, and watched. Because somewhere, someday, another exchange would rise, and the harvest would begin again. The morning fog rolled in thick off the Pacific Ocean, shrouding Venice Beach in a gray veil that seemed to muffle even the sound of the waves. FBI Special Agent Archibald Pembroke stood on the boardwalk, watching the early morning joggers materialize and disappear like ghosts in the mist. It was June 2001, and he'd been called to investigate a pattern of disappearances that the LAPD could no longer explain away as typical Los Angeles transients. Officer Nathaniel Bradshaw of the Venice Beach Patrol Unit had been the first to notice the pattern. A 20-year veteran who knew every regular on the boardwalk, he'd compiled a list that made for disturbing reading. 32 people in the last 18 months, Bradshaw explained, spreading files across a picnic table near the skate park. All regulars, street performers, vendors, fitness enthusiasts who used Muscle Beach. Not transients who might normally move on, but people with established routines, regular spots, communities who knew them. Pembroke examined the files. The missing persons ranged in age from 18 to 35, all in excellent physical condition, all with no history of mental illness or substance abuse that might explain a sudden disappearance. "What made you call federal involvement?" Pembroke asked. "This," Bradshaw said, producing a photograph. It showed a section of beach near the Venice Pier, taken at night with infrared film. In the image, several figures could be seen carrying what appeared to be a body toward a van. Security camera from a beachfront restaurant. The owner only noticed it when reviewing footage after his nephew mentioned seeing strange activity at night. The image quality was poor, but forensic enhancement had revealed something crucial. The van had medical equipment visible through its rear windows, and one of the figures was wearing what appeared to be surgical scrubs. Medical personnel abducting people from Venice Beach? That's what it looks like. But here's the strange part. No hospitals in the area have reported any unusual activity. No ambulance services show calls to these locations, and no medical facilities are missing vehicles. Pembroke established a command center in a vacant storefront on the boardwalk, positioning himself in the heart of where the disappearances were occurring. The first thing he did was map the disappearance sites, and a pattern emerged immediately. All were within a half-mile radius of an abandoned building on Pacific Avenue, a former medical clinic that had closed in 1995. The clinic had been owned by Dr. Eleanor Cromwell, a psychiatrist who'd specialized in treating homeless populations and addiction disorders. According to records, she died in 1996, a year after the clinic closed, but the building remained in her estate's possession, neither sold nor demolished. "No one goes near that place," a local vendor named Carlos told Pembroke when asked about the building. "Bad energy. People who sleep too close to it have nightmares. Sometimes at night you can see lights inside, but the police say it's just reflections from the street." Pembroke obtained a warrant to search the building. From the outside, it appeared completely abandoned. Boarded windows, graffiti-covered walls, a condemned notice from 1997. But the lock on the back door was new, high security, recently installed. Inside, the clinic's waiting room was as expected. Dusty, abandoned, furniture covered in sheets. But Pembroke noticed something odd. The dust patterns were inconsistent. Some areas showed years of accumulation. Others looked recently disturbed. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, of disinfectant. Following the scent led them to what had been the clinic's basement, accessed through a hidden door behind a filing cabinet. The stairs down were clean, well-maintained, with fresh paint on the walls. At the bottom, they found themselves in a fully operational medical facility. The basement had been expanded far beyond the building's original footprint, extending under neighboring structures. Operating rooms, recovery areas, examination rooms, all equipped with modern medical equipment. But it was the purpose of this equipment that made Pembroke's blood run cold. In one room, they found detailed anatomical charts, but these weren't standard medical diagrams. They showed surgical modifications, additions to the human body that shouldn't exist. Gills grafted onto necks, webbing between fingers and toes, modifications to eyes for enhanced underwater vision. "What the hell were they doing here?" Bradshaw whispered, staring at the diagrams. They found their answer in the next room. Medical files, dozens of them, each documenting what they called aquatic adaptation procedures. The files contained before and after photos showing human subjects who'd been surgically modified to be semi-aquatic. The project was called Neptune's Children, and according to the documentation, it had been running for 3 years. The goal was to create humans capable of living both on land and underwater, preparing for what the documents described as the inevitable flooding of coastal cities due to climate change. One file caught Pembroke's attention, Subject 27, marked as Successful Integration. The before photo showed a young woman who'd been reported missing from Venice Beach 6 months earlier, Sarah Martinez, a fitness instructor who'd taught yoga on the beach. The after photos were horrific. Her neck showed gill slits, her hands and feet were webbed. Her eyes had been surgically altered to include nictitating membranes like those found in sharks. But the most disturbing notation was at the bottom of her file: Subject successfully released into Pacific ecosystem. Monitoring ongoing. "They put her in the ocean?" Bradshaw said, reading over Pembroke's shoulder. A sound from deeper in the facility made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching from a section they hadn't explored yet. Pembroke drew his weapon, motioning for Bradshaw to call for backup. Before backup could arrive, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. They wore medical attire but moved wrong, too fluid, almost undulating. As they came into the light, Pembroke saw why. They'd been modified. Gill slits on their necks opened and closed. Their eyes were larger than normal with a silvery sheen, and when one spoke, the voice was distorted, gurgling. You shouldn't be here, the lead figure said. The work is not complete. FBI, you're all under arrest, Pembroke announced, though he wasn't sure what he was even looking at. The figure that seemed to be the leader laughed, a sound like water bubbling through pipes. Arrest? We're trying to save humanity. The oceans are rising, cities will flood. We're creating the next evolution of human survival. You're experimenting on unwilling subjects. Unwilling? They volunteered. Every one of them chose transformation over their meaningless lives on the boardwalk. We gave them purpose, evolution, a future. The leader pulled back their surgical mask, revealing a face that was barely human anymore. Scales covered parts of the skin, the nose was almost flat with slit-like nostrils, and the mouth was wider than it should be. I am Dr. Harold Morrison, the figure said. I was Dr. Eleanor Cromwell's colleague. When she died, I continued her vision. She believed humanity needed to adapt to survive. I've made that vision reality. Backup arrived then, SWAT, officers flooding into the basement, but they stopped short when they saw the modified beings. The standoff was surreal. Police officers pointing weapons at creatures that had once been human, unsure if they were dealing with victims or perpetrators. Dr. Morrison raised his webbed hands in surrender. We won't resist, but you need to understand, there are more of us. In the ocean, in the storm drains, in the aquifers beneath the city. We're not monsters, we're the future. As they were being arrested, one of the modified beings, younger than the others, spoke to Pembroke directly. Please, she said, her voice more human than Morrison's. Some of us want to be changed back. We were promised we could return to normal if we didn't like it. But the process, it's irreversible. The full search of the facility revealed the horrible scope of the experiments. 32 people had been taken from Venice Beach, all subjected to various stages of modification. 12 had died during the procedures, their bodies disposed of at sea. 8 were in the facility, in various stages of transformation. The remaining 12 had been released into the ocean. In Morrison's office, they found correspondence with investors, tech billionaires who believed that climate change would create a market for enhanced humans capable of surviving in flooded cities. They'd funded the research, expecting to profit from selling the modification procedures to wealthy clients seeking to survive the anticipated apocalypse. One investor, Richard Townsend, had even undergone partial modification himself, giving him the ability to hold his breath for 30 minutes and see clearly underwater. He'd been using these abilities to scout underwater real estate, planning to buy up submerged properties for when humanity moved beneath the waves. The medical equipment was state-of-the-art, some of it experimental technology that shouldn't have been available outside of major research hospitals. The surgical techniques were advanced, combining genetic therapy with traditional surgery and cybernetic implants. It was brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. Among the files, Pembroke found video logs of the procedures. Watching them required a strong stomach. Subjects were conscious during parts of the modifications, screaming as their bodies were altered. Morrison's voice could be heard explaining that the pain was necessary, that the nervous system needed to be recalibrated while active. But the most disturbing discovery came when they found the nursery. In a sealed section of the facility, they discovered tanks containing what Morrison had labeled second-generation specimens. These weren't modified humans. They were children born from modified parents, exhibiting aquatic adaptations from birth. 3 infants, all under a year old, floating in specially designed aquatic chambers that allowed them to breathe both air and water. They're beautiful, Morrison had said when asked about them. Pure expressions of human evolution. No surgical trauma, no rejection of implants. they're naturally what we've been trying to create artificially. The 3 infants in the aquatic chambers presented an immediate ethical and medical crisis. They couldn't simply be removed. Their physiology had developed to require partial submersion. The specialized medical team called in from UCLA Medical Center was stunned by what they found. These children have functioning gills, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a pediatric specialist, told Pembroke. Their lungs are adapted for both air and water breathing. We removed them from these chambers, and they could die, but we can't leave them here. The decision was made to transport the entire chamber system to a specialized facility at UCLA, where the children could be studied and hopefully helped. But during the transfer, something unexpected happened. One of the modified subjects who'd been arrested began convulsing, their gill slits opening and closing frantically. "Water," they gasped. "Need water." Dr. Morrison, watching from his restraints, spoke calmly. "They need to be submerged every 4 hours. Their modified physiology requires it. Deny them water, and they'll die within 12 hours. This revelation complicated everything. The 8 modified individuals couldn't be held in normal custody. They were transferred to a marine research facility in Long Beach that was hastily converted into a secure medical ward, with tanks and pools that allowed them to submerge as needed. During his interrogation, Morrison revealed more about the project's origins. Dr. Eleanor Cromwell hadn't died in 1996. She'd been the first successful test subject. "She's out there in the Pacific," Morrison said. "She pioneered the procedure on herself when she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. The modifications not only saved her life, but gave her a new one. She's been living in the ocean for 5 years, studying marine ecosystems from within." "You're saying Dr. Cromwell is alive, living as some kind of mermaid?" Morrison laughed at the term. "Nothing so fantastical. She's a human adapted for aquatic life. She surfaces occasionally, communicates with us, provides guidance on the procedures. She's the proof that this works." Officer Nathaniel Bradshaw had been investigating the financial side of the operation and discovered something alarming. The investors weren't just tech billionaires. They included members of California's water management boards, environmental protection agencies, and coastal development committees. "They're all people in positions to know about sea level rise projections," Bradshaw explained to Pembroke. "Classified reports that haven't been made public. They know something we don't about how bad it's going to get." One investor, Catherine Holloway, was the head of California's Coastal Commission. When brought in for questioning, she was surprisingly forthright. "The real projections are far worse than what's been released publicly," she said. "By 2050, most of Los Angeles' coastal areas will be underwater. Venice, Santa Monica, Marina del Rey, all gone. We've been suppressing the data to prevent panic and property value collapse." "So, you funded human experimentation." "I funded adaptation research. Would you rather we let millions drown?" Dr. Morrison's work, while ethically questionable in its methods, offered a solution. Humans who could survive the flooding, who could rebuild civilization from beneath the waves. The revelation that government officials had known about and funded the experiment sent shockwaves through the investigation. The Attorney General appointed a special prosecutor, and what started as a missing persons case became a conspiracy involving some of California's most powerful people. Meanwhile, the search for the 12 subjects who'd been released into the ocean began. The Coast Guard deployed vessels with sonar and underwater cameras, but finding human-sized targets in the vast Pacific was nearly impossible. Then, 3 days into the search, they got unexpected help. A fishing vessel reported strange contact on their sonar, moving in patterns too organized to be marine life. When Pembroke and a dive team investigated, they found something unprecedented, an underwater settlement. Built into a kelp forest about a mile offshore, the modified humans had created a community. Using salvaged materials and natural formations, they'd constructed shelters, laid out rudimentary streets, even established what appeared to be gathering areas. It was primitive but organized, a village beneath the waves. The dive team, equipped with underwater communication devices, attempted contact. At first, the modified humans fled, moving through the water with impossible grace and speed. But then one approached, a woman whose file identified her as Sarah Martinez, the missing yoga instructor. Through a combination of sign language and written messages on waterproof boards, she communicated with the team. She didn't want to return to the surface. None of them did. They'd found peace in their new existence, free from the struggles of land-based life. "We're not prisoners," she wrote. "We're pioneers." But not all the ocean dwellers felt the same. 3 wanted to return, despite knowing the modifications were irreversible. They were brought to the surface and taken to the Long Beach facility, where they joined the others in trying to adapt to a life between two worlds. The investigation uncovered Morrison's laboratory notes, which detailed the full horror of the experimentation process. The 32 victims hadn't all volunteered as Morrison claimed. Many had been drugged, taken from the beach at night, and woken up already partially modified. The psychological trauma was as severe as the physical. One survivor, James Patterson, a former street artist, described his experience. "I was painting a mural near the pier. Someone offered me a drink of water. It was hot. I was dehydrated. Next thing I knew, I woke up in that basement, and they were putting something in my neck. I could feel them cutting, installing something. They said I'd thank them later, that I was being given a gift." The modifications weren't just surgical. Morrison had been using experimental gene therapy, retroviruses that rewrote human DNA. The subjects weren't just surgically altered. They were genetically modified organisms, GMOS in human form. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, studying the modified individuals, made a disturbing discovery. "The modifications are progressive," she explained to Pembroke. "The genetic changes continue even after the initial procedures. They're becoming less human over time. In another few years, they might be genetically distinct enough to be classified as a different species." This raised terrifying questions. Could the modified humans breed with normal humans? Were their modifications contagious in any way? What happened to the human genome if these altered individuals integrated into the general population? The 3 infants in the chambers provided partial answers. Born from 2 modified parents who'd met in the underwater settlement, they represented a new branch of human evolution, one directed not by nature but by the deliberate intervention of Dr. Morrison and his team. Among Morrison's files, they found something even more ambitious: plans for Phase 2. This involved not just modifying individuals, but creating underwater cities, complete colonies of modified humans who would establish a parallel civilization beneath the waves. The plans were detailed and well-funded. Underwater structures were already being built off Catalina Island, powered by thermal vents and designed to house thousands. The investors saw it as the ultimate gated community, a place where the wealthy could survive climate change while the rest of humanity struggled on the surface. "It's not just about survival," Morrison explained during a subsequent interrogation. "It's about transcendence. The ocean covers 70% of Earth's surface. We're not fleeing the land, we're claiming the rest of the planet." The modified individuals at the Long Beach facility were struggling. Despite pools and tanks, they couldn't fully satisfy their need for ocean water. The salt content, pressure, and ecosystem of the actual ocean couldn't be replicated. Several were developing health problems, their modified bodies failing without their intended environment. Dr. Morrison offered a solution that created an ethical nightmare. "Let me continue treating them," he proposed. "I can stabilize their conditions, help them adapt to a hybrid existence. Without my expertise, they'll all die within months." It was blackmail, but it was also probably true. Morrison understood the modifications better than anyone. The authorities were forced to allow him supervised access to the patients, working under heavy guard to keep the victims alive. During these sessions, Morrison revealed more about Dr. Eleanor Cromwell's current status. She wasn't just living in the ocean, she was leading the underwater colony. The modified humans saw her as a prophet, the first of their kind, the one who'd shown them the way to a new existence. "She wants to meet with you," Morrison told Pembroke. "She says she can explain everything, show you why this is necessary." The meeting was arranged at night on a platform off the Venice Pier. Pembroke waited with a security detail, wondering if they were about to arrest a ghost or validate Morrison's claims. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the water. It had once been Dr. Eleanor Cromwell, but 5 years of aquatic modification had transformed her into something barely recognizable as human. Her skin had a blue-gray tint with a scaled texture. Her eyes were enormous and silver, and gill slits on her neck opened and closed rhythmically. When she spoke, it was with difficulty. Her vocal cords adapted more for underwater communication. "Agent Pembroke," she said, her voice like waves on shingle. "I know how this looks. But you need to understand, we're not the monsters here. We're the solution to humanity's greatest crisis." She produced waterproof documents, climate data, ocean temperature readings, projections that showed catastrophic sea level rise within decades, not centuries. "The governments know," she continued. "They're building seawalls, planning evacuations, preparing for wars over remaining land. We're offering another option, evolution instead of extinction. You're forcing evolution on unwilling subjects. Every evolution is forced by circumstances. The asteroid forced mammals to evolve. The Ice Age forced humans to adapt. The rising seas will force the next change. We're just getting ahead of it." She revealed that there were other facilities, other groups conducting similar experiments around the world. Japan, Norway, Australia, coastal nations were all secretly exploring aquatic human modification. "This isn't a crime, Agent Pembroke. It's a race. The first nation to successfully create aquatic humans will dominate the future. America is already behind." Pembroke tried to arrest her, but she simply smiled, dove backward off the platform, and disappeared into the black water. The security detail's attempts to pursue were futile. She moved through the ocean like she was born to it, which in a way, she now was. The investigation expanded internationally. Interpol confirmed similar disappearances and modifications in other coastal cities. The Venus Beach facility wasn't unique. It was part of a global network of researchers trying to create aquatic humans. Back at the Long Beach facility, the modified subjects were forming their own community. They'd begun to see themselves not as victims, but as a new minority group, demanding rights and recognition. Some wanted to return to the ocean, to join the underwater colony. Others wanted to find a way to live on land while maintaining their modifications. One of them, a young man named Marcus, who'd been a surfer before his modification, became their unofficial spokesman. "We didn't choose this," he told a gathering of reporters, speaking from a specially designed podium that allowed him to submerge periodically. "But we are this now. We're not fully human anymore, but we're not monsters either. We're something new, and we deserve to exist." The legal implications of the Neptune's Children project created unprecedented challenges for the justice system. How do you prosecute crimes when the victims claimed they weren't victims? What rights did genetically modified humans have? Were the children in the tanks American citizens, a new species, or something in between? Agent Archibald Pembroke found himself at the center of these debates, testifying before Congress about what they'd discovered in Venice Beach. The hearings were closed to the public, the information deemed too sensitive and potentially panic-inducing. What we're dealing with, Pembroke testified, is not just illegal human experimentation. It's an attempt to create a breakaway civilization funded by people who believe conventional humanity has no future. Senator James Crawford, heading the investigation committee, was particularly interested in the government officials who'd known about and funded the project. Are you telling us that members of our own government are preparing for an apocalypse they're not telling the public about? The evidence suggests that classified climate data shows far worse projections than what's been released publicly. These officials saw the Neptune's Children project as a lifeboat for humanity. The hearings were interrupted when news broke that one of the modified humans at the Long Beach facility had died. Thomas Rodriguez, a former Venice Beach lifeguard who'd been one of the first subjects modified, had suffered complete organ failure when his gills and lungs began rejecting each other. Dr. Harold Morrison, who'd been consulting on the medical care, claimed it was because they weren't allowing Thomas to return to the ocean. His body had fully adapted to marine life, Morrison explained. Keeping him in tanks and pools is like keeping a bird in a cage. The stress of captivity killed him. This death sparked protests from an unexpected source. Environmental and human rights groups who argued that the modified humans should be allowed to choose their own fate, including returning to the ocean if they wished. Marina Blackwood, a civil rights attorney, took on the case pro bono. These individuals, regardless of their modifications, retain human rights, she argued in federal court. They have the right to choose where and how they live. If they choose the ocean, who are we to stop them? The case, officially titled Marcus et al. v. United States, would become a landmark in human rights law. The modified humans were suing for the right to return to the ocean, to be recognized as a distinct group with special protections, and for compensation for their involuntary modification. During the trial, more disturbing information emerged. Officer Nathaniel Bradshaw had discovered a second facility, this one in Marina del Rey, hidden beneath a yacht club. This facility was even more advanced, with evidence that they'd been modifying children, runaways and foster children who wouldn't be missed. 5 children, ages 10 to 16, were found in various stages of modification. Unlike the adults, their younger bodies had adapted more completely to the changes. They could no longer breathe air without assistance, requiring special breathing apparatus when out of water. The youngest, a 10-year-old girl who'd been reported as a runaway named Emily, had been in the facility for 6 months. Her transformation was so complete that she could no longer speak above water, communicating only through sign language and written messages. "They told me I was special," she wrote during her interview, "that I was chosen to be part of something amazing. They said my parents didn't want me, but the ocean would always love me." The psychological manipulation of children added another layer of horror to the already heinous crimes. Dr. Morrison and his team hadn't just been modifying bodies, they'd been indoctrinating their subjects, creating a cult-like devotion to their aquatic transformation. Documents recovered from the Marina del Rey facility revealed the full scope of the indoctrination program. Subjects were shown carefully edited videos of environmental disasters, told that the surface world was doomed, and that only through transformation could they survive. They were taught that normal humans would eventually go extinct, and that the modified were the chosen ones who would inherit the earth. One video, clearly meant for younger subjects, was styled like a children's cartoon. It featured animated characters happily transforming into aquatic beings, singing songs about the joy of living underwater. The production quality suggested significant funding and resources had gone into the propaganda campaign. The investigation into the funding revealed connections to several tech companies developing underwater habitats and equipment. These companies had been preparing to profit from the creation of an aquatic human market, selling specialized equipment, underwater housing, modified food that could be consumed underwater. Richard Townsend, the tech billionaire who'd undergone partial modification, was arrested at his Malibu mansion. His home contained plans for an underwater city off the California coast, complete with factories, schools, and governance structures. He'd been planning to be the founder of a new aquatic nation. "You're thinking too small," Townsend told Pembroke during interrogation. "This isn't about a few modified humans. This is about the next stage of human civilization. The oceans are empty real estate, unclaimed territory. First one to colonize them wins the future." His computers contained correspondence with similar groups worldwide. The Chinese had a program called Dragon's Depth. The Russians had Poseidon's Children. The Japanese were developing Umi no Kodomo, Children of the Sea. It was a secret arms race, but instead of weapons, they were racing to create the first successful aquatic human colony. Meanwhile, Dr. Eleanor Cromwell had become more bold. She began appearing near beaches at night, speaking to the modified humans in the Long Beach facility through underwater speakers. Her message was consistent. They were prisoners of a dying world, and their only hope was to join her in the ocean. 3 of the modified subjects attempted escape, trying to reach the ocean. 2 were caught, but one, David Park, a former swimmer, made it to the water. The Coast Guard tracked him for several hours before losing him in a kelp forest. He was never seen again, presumably joining Cromwell's underwater colony. The colony, as it came to be known, was growing. Aerial surveillance showed structures being built on the ocean floor, networks of caves being connected, even what appeared to be underwater agriculture. Kelp farms and fish pens. The modified humans weren't just surviving in the ocean, they were thriving. Pembroke received permission to attempt a diplomatic contact with the colony. Using a deep-sea submersible with a marine biologist and a negotiator, they descended to the settlement off Venice Beach. What they found exceeded all expectations. The colony had grown to nearly 50 individuals, including the 12 originally released and others who'd escaped or been secretly modified at other facilities. They'd created a functioning society with leadership structures, division of labor, even art, sculptures made from coral and salvaged materials. Dr. Cromwell met them at what served as the colony's border, accompanied by 4 other modified humans who seemed to serve as guards or escorts. Through the submersible's communication system, she spoke with Pembroke. "You come to our territory as guests," she said. "We mean no harm to the surface world. We simply want to be left alone to build our new civilization. You're harboring fugitives. Several of your colonists are wanted for crimes. Crimes according to whose laws? We don't recognize surface authority here. We have our own laws, our own justice." She showed them around the colony, pointing out the nursery where 3 more children had been born, naturally aquatic from birth, never needing modification. These children, she claimed, were proof that they were a viable new branch of humanity. "In 50 years, Cromwell said, there will be thousands of us. In 100, millions. We'll inhabit every ocean, explore depths humans have never seen, discover resources that could benefit all of humanity." The negotiator, Dr. Patricia Santos, tried to find middle ground. What if we could establish formal relations? Recognize the colony as a reservation of sorts? You could live freely, but within legal frameworks. Cromwell laughed, a sound distorted by water. A reservation? Like you did with the Native Americans? No, we claim the oceans as sovereign territory. Any surface dweller who enters without permission is trespassing. The situation was becoming a diplomatic crisis. The modified humans were essentially declaring independence, claiming international waters as their nation. The UN was brought in, maritime law experts consulted, but no one had precedent for dealing with aquatic human separatists. Back at the Long Beach facility, the remaining modified subjects were following the colony situation closely. They were divided. Some wanted to join the colony, others wanted to find a way to integrate into surface society, and a few still hoped for some kind of reversal of their modifications. Dr. Patricia Hoffman had been working on potential treatments, but her findings were not encouraging. The modifications are integrated at a genetic level, she explained to Pembroke. We could possibly reverse some of the surgical alterations, but the genetic changes are permanent. Even if we could remove the gills and webbing, their DNA has been fundamentally altered. Their children would still carry these modifications. This raised another terrifying possibility. The modifications could spread through the general population through reproduction. If modified humans had children with unmodified partners, the offspring might carry aquatic traits. The human genome itself could be permanently altered. Dr. Morrison, from his cell, seemed pleased by this prospect. Evolution doesn't ask permission, he said during a psychological evaluation. Once the genes are in the population, natural selection takes over. The aquatic traits will spread because they offer survival advantages in a flooding world. The government was faced with an impossible choice. They could try to destroy the colony, potentially committing genocide against what might be considered a new human subspecies. They could recognize it, essentially admitting that unauthorized human experimentation had created a valid breakaway civilization. Or they could ignore it, allowing the colony to grow unchecked. While officials debated, more modified humans were appearing. Some were products of other facilities not yet discovered. Others were volunteers who'd sought out modification after learning about the colony. The technology, despite efforts to suppress it, was spreading. A black market emerged for modification procedures. Desperate people facing coastal flooding, extreme swimmers wanting to break records, even thrill seekers looking for the ultimate body modification. All sought out doctors willing to perform the procedures. One underground clinic in Tijuana was raided, finding 3 people mid-modification. The doctor performing the procedures was a former associate of Morrison's who'd fled before the Venice Beach raid. He'd been charging $500,000 per transformation, promising to make people evolution's chosen. The modified humans at Long Beach made a collective decision. 5 chose to return to the ocean, accepting that they would be fugitives from surface law but free in their new element. 3 chose to remain in custody, hoping for eventual treatment or acceptance. The rest, led by Marcus, decided to fight for legal recognition and rights. The Marcus case reached the Supreme Court, raising questions that the founders could never have imagined. Were genetically modified humans still covered by the Constitution? Did the government have the right to prevent people from modifying themselves? Could a group of modified humans declare sovereignty over parts of the ocean? During the hearings, Marcus himself testified, speaking from a specially installed tank that allowed him to remain partially submerged. "We didn't choose this transformation," he said, his voice carrying both sadness and determination. "But we are transformed. We're not asking for special treatment, just recognition that we exist, that we have rights, that we're still persons under the law despite our modifications." The court was divided. Some justices argued that the modified humans were victims of crimes and should be protected and aided. Others worried that recognizing them as a distinct group would encourage more illegal modifications. Still, others questioned whether beings who could no longer fully function on land could be considered citizens of a land-based nation. The Supreme Court's decision in Marcus et al. Versus United States would define the legal status of modified humans for generations. But before the verdict could be delivered, a crisis emerged that changed everything. Agent Archibald Pembroke received an urgent call at 3 a.m. from the Coast Guard. Multiple vessels had reported strange activities in the waters off Los Angeles. Modified humans were emerging from the ocean in unprecedented numbers, not to attack, but to deliver a warning. At Venice Beach, where it had all started, Pembroke found dozens of modified humans standing in the shallows, their gill slits flaring in the night air. Dr. Eleanor Cromwell stood at their center, and for the first time, she looked afraid. "Agent Pembroke," she called out, her voice carrying over the sound of waves, "we need your help. Something's gone wrong with the modifications. The second generation, the children born modified, they're dying." The crisis she described was horrific. The naturally born aquatic children were suffering from rapid cellular degradation. Their modified genes were unstable, breaking down, causing organ failure and neurological damage. 3 had already died in the colony, and 5 more were critical. "We need Morrison," Cromwell admitted, the words clearly painful for her. "He understands the genetic sequences better than anyone. Without him, all the children will die within weeks." It was an impossible situation. Morrison was awaiting trial for multiple counts of kidnapping, human experimentation, and murder, but he might be the only person who could save the dying children. Pembroke made the call to his superiors, and within hours a deal was being negotiated. Morrison would be temporarily released under heavy guard to help treat the children, but only if the colony agreed to certain conditions: UN oversight, regular health inspections, and cessation of any new modifications. Morrison was brought to the Long Beach facility, where the sickest children had been transferred. Seeing them, his clinical demeanor cracked for the first time. "I didn't account for generational degradation," he said, examining a 3-year-old whose scales were literally flaking off, revealing raw tissue beneath. "The modified genes are unstable when inherited rather than inserted. They're breaking down like copies of copies, each generation more degraded." He worked for 72 straight hours, developing a gene therapy that might stabilize the children's conditions. It wasn't a cure, nothing could undo their modifications, but it might stop the degradation. During this crisis, something unexpected happened. The modified humans in custody, the colony dwellers, and even the surface medical team began working together. The shared goal of saving the children transcended the divisions between them. Marcus, the unofficial spokesman for the modified humans, helped translate between the colony dwellers and the surface team, as many had developed their own language for underwater communication. Officer Nathaniel Bradshaw coordinated logistics, ensuring supplies and equipment reached both the facility and the colony. Even some of the investors who'd funded the original project came forward, offering resources and expertise. The treatment Morrison developed required a substance found only in certain deep-sea fish, a protein that could stabilize the modified genes. The colony dwellers dove to depths no human could reach, harvesting the needed specimens. It was dangerous work. 2 modified humans died in the deep trenches, pressure finally overwhelming even their enhanced bodies. As the children slowly stabilized, the larger implications became clear. The modifications, while allowing for aquatic survival, were not evolutionarily viable. The modified humans could live in the ocean, but their children and grandchildren would suffer increasing genetic degradation. They were not the future of humanity, but a biological dead end. Dr. Cromwell, faced with this reality, made a public statement that shocked everyone. "We were wrong," she said, speaking from the Long Beach facility to assembled media. "Not about the need to prepare for rising seas, but about the solution. Modifying humans to live underwater isn't evolution. It's extinction by another path. We've created beings who can survive, but not thrive, exist, but not perpetuate." The colony faced an existential crisis. Many members chose to remain in the ocean, accepting their fate as the last of their kind. Others requested to return to surface society, seeking whatever treatment might help them readjust to land life. The Supreme Court, influenced by these events, delivered a complex verdict. The modified humans were recognized as persons with full rights under the Constitution. However, the modifications themselves were banned, with performing such procedures classified as crimes against humanity. The colony was granted a special status, not sovereignty, but a protected area where modified humans could live without interference, similar to Native American reservations, but in the ocean. Morrison was convicted on reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation in treating the children and developing protocols to help modified humans adapt to hybrid land-sea life. He was sentenced to 20 years, but would serve it in a special facility where he could continue research on treating, not creating, modified humans. Richard Townsend and the other investors faced financial ruin and criminal charges. Their assets were seized and used to create a fund for the modified humans' ongoing care and for research into treating their conditions. Catherine Holloway, the Coastal Commission head who'd hidden climate data, was convicted of misuse of public office and conspiracy. Her trial revealed the extent to which government officials had hidden the true projections of sea level rise, sparking a separate scandal that led to numerous resignations and reforms. The international community, shocked by the revelations from Los Angeles, signed the Monaco Accords, a global ban on human aquatic modification. The Chinese, Russian, and Japanese programs were officially terminated, though rumors persisted of continued research in international waters. Agent Pembroke, reflecting on the case a year later, stood again on Venice Beach. The boardwalk was busy with its usual mix of performers, vendors, and tourists. But now there were also modified humans, wearing special hydration suits that allowed them to spend time on land. They sold art made from ocean materials, taught swimming lessons that no unmodified human could match, and served as bridges between two worlds. The Venice Beach Aquatic Center had been established where the old clinic once stood. It served as a medical facility for modified humans, a research center for treating their conditions, and a memorial to those who died in the experiments. Marcus had become an advocate for modified human rights, working with the UN on protocols for their protection. He spent half his time in water, half on land, living between worlds but finding purpose in helping others navigate the same divide. "We're not the future," he told Pembroke during an interview, "but we're part of the present now. We exist, we have rights, and we have something to contribute. Maybe that's enough." The colony still existed, though smaller than before. About 30 modified humans chose to remain fully aquatic, maintaining the underwater settlement as a unique community. Dr. Cromwell led them, no longer promoting modification, but focusing on understanding and protecting ocean ecosystems from within. She sent regular reports to marine biologists, providing insights no one else could gather. In an ironic twist, the modified humans became some of the ocean's most effective protectors, able to monitor and document pollution, illegal fishing, and ecosystem changes in ways no equipment could match. The children who'd survived the genetic degradation were special cases. 7 in total, they required constant medical supervision and regular gene therapy to maintain stability. They lived at the aquatic center, able to experience both worlds, but fully belonging to neither. Emily, the 10-year-old who'd been rescued from the Marina del Rey facility, had adapted better than most. With therapy and support, she'd learned to communicate on land again, though she still preferred water. She'd decided she wanted to become a marine biologist, to understand what had been done to her, and maybe find ways to help others, screens while floating in a specially designed pool. But I can choose what to do with it. I can be bitter, or I can be bridge. I choose bridge. Dr. Harold Morrison, from his special prison facility, continued research on stabilizing the modifications. He'd never expressed remorse for his actions, still believing that aquatic modification would eventually be necessary for humanity's survival. But he'd acknowledged his methods were wrong. I was so focused on the destination that I ignored the journey's cost, he said during a psychological evaluation. I created suffering in the name of preventing suffering. The irony isn't lost on me. His research, conducted under strict ethical oversight, led to treatments that improved the quality of life for modified humans. Some regained partial ability to breathe air for extended periods. Others saw a reduction in their dependency on salt water. None could be fully reversed, but small improvements made huge differences in their daily lives. The broader implications of the Neptune's Children Project rippled through society. Genetic modification of humans became a global concern, with new regulations and oversight bodies established. The incident had shown how easily the line between enhancement and exploitation could be crossed. Climate change preparations took on new urgency, but with focus on adaptation strategies that didn't require transforming humans. Seawalls, floating cities, and inland relocation became priorities. The hidden climate data was released, causing panic but also spurring action. 5 years after the initial discovery, Pembroke retired from the FBI. His last case had been tracking down the remaining modification facilities worldwide, a task that took him from the shores of Japan to hidden labs in Norway. Each raid revealed more victims, more variations on the modification theme, more evidence of humanity's willingness to transform itself in the face of crisis. In his retirement speech, he said, "The Venice Beach disappearances taught us that the drive to survive can lead to terrible choices. When faced with extinction, some will choose transformation at any cost. Our job is to ensure that cost is never paid by unwilling victims, that evolution remains natural, not forced. The modified humans among us are reminders of what happens when fear overrides ethics, when the future seems so dire that any solution seems acceptable. They're victims who've become symbols, unwilling pioneers of a path humanity chose not to take. But they're also teachers. Through their sacrifice, we've learned about genetic modification, adaptation, and the limits of human enhancement. Their suffering wasn't chosen, but their survival and dignity in the face of transformation shows the resilience of the human spirit, modified or not. The oceans are rising, that's undeniable. But the solution isn't to transform humans into aquatic beings. It's to transform how we live, how we build, how we respect the planet. The modified humans paid the price for teaching us that lesson. We owe it to them to learn it. The Venice Beach Boardwalk remained a testament to that lesson. Where street performers once disappeared, modified humans now performed, their aquatic abilities drawing crowds. Where a hidden clinic once conducted horrific experiments, a treatment center now helped victims recover. Where fear once drove desperate experimentation, understanding slowly grew. Officer Nathaniel Bradshaw, promoted to detective after the case, continued to patrol Venice Beach. He kept special watch over the modified humans who'd integrated into the community, ensuring their protection and rights. He'd become an expert on their needs, their capabilities, and their struggles. "They're part of Venice now," he said, watching a modified human teach a child to swim. their webbed hands and feet making them incredibly effective instructors. Not the future we expected, but the present we have to accept. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows on the beach, the two worlds, land and sea, modified and natural, coexisted uneasily but necessarily. The Neptune's Children Project had failed in its goal to create a new branch of humanity, but it had succeeded in showing humanity its own capacity for both monstrosity and adaptation. In the waters off Venice Beach, the colony continued its strange existence, a living reminder of humanity's attempt to conquer nature by becoming it. And on the shore, the rest of humanity watched, learned, and prepared for rising seas, not by transforming themselves, but by transforming their world. The Venice Beach disappearances were solved, the victims found and freed. But the questions they raised about human enhancement, survival, and the price of evolution would echo for generations. In trying to create the future, Dr. Morrison and his followers had instead created a warning that in our rush to adapt, we must not lose what makes us human,